Chapter 79. Yes, this young master is negotiating with you. Zhang Honglai replied confidently. If he didn't have so many grade 3 fire talismans and the high-grade human-grade magic artifact Soul Whip in his hand, he absolutely wouldn't dare to challenge Yi Feiyue. Yi Feiyue didn't expect that Zhang Honglai would actually dare to challenge her. She couldn't help but feel angry. In the mysterious vast continent, even Duan Yao had to pay attention when speaking to her. Zhang Honglai, do you think you have the qualifications? Yi Feiyue felt challenged. Yi Feiyue, are you going or not? Duan Yao, who was standing in the distance, was somewhat impatient. He just wanted to rush to the scene of the battle as soon as possible to see who was so powerful that he could fight with Orson for such a long time. You go first, Yi Feiyue replied. All right, goodbye, Duan Yao said as he rushed out. As for the problem between Yi Feiyue and Zhang Honglai, he didn't care at all. The battle between Li Daochong and Orson had reached its climax. After a round of bombardment, both sides finally began to move. However, once he started to move, Orson immediately began to feel strenuous. His opponent's body coordination was terrifyingly high. His steps were steady, and his movements were as steady as a mountain. Li Daochong wasn't interested in a protracted battle. He originally thought that he could defeat Orson by standing still. However, after a few minutes, he found that it seemed impossible. Therefore, he began to move and look for flaws. Bang! Li Daochong punched Orson's face, sending him flying and crashing into a building on the street. The building immediately collapsed. Without any pause, Orson shot out from the collapsed building and punched at Li Daochong. Orson clearly felt that his punch would hit, but at the moment of impact, Li Daochong's body moved like a ghost. He didn't seem to be dodging too much and easily dodged. He was as slippery as a loach. Although he caught him, he couldn't really control him. Orson was very annoyed and couldn't wait to grab Li Daochong and bite him. In fact, Li Daochong himself was surprised that he could dodge it so easily. The effect of the special training was fully displayed at this moment. Only now did Li Daochong truly understand what the spatial perception that Chu Qianyue had been talking about was. Bang! Li Daochong sent Orson flying with another punch. After moving, Orson was no match for Li Daochong. From time to time, he would be sent flying by Li Daochong's punches. However, his ability to take hits was far beyond Li Daochong's expectations. This kid was simply a rubber man. No matter how he was hit, he would bounce back again. The passage of time made Li Daochong a little impatient. Li Qingyao had said an hour ago that she would be here soon, but there was still no news from her. At this moment, Li Daochong's wristwatch vibrated. He raised his head and saw that it was a message from Li Qingyao. There was only one short sentence. Brother, quickly leave Shang City. Zhang Honglai is looking for you. Li Daochong frowned and paused. In that instant of hesitation, Orson quickly greeted him with a punch. Li Daochong hastily raised his arm to block. With a bang, a huge force was transmitted, and he was sent flying like a cannonball. This was the first time Orson had hit Li Daochong head-on. Many of the spectating students were astonished. They felt that Li Daochong shouldn't have been hit. The spectating students gradually adapted from the initial shock. As the battle progressed, Li Daochong's strength gradually stabilized in the hearts of the students. Although many students were unwilling to accept that a foolish young master who was once useless would become so powerful in just a few months' time, it was an indisputable fact that Li Daochong and Orson were engaged in a fierce battle that couldn't be refuted. Even so, the students still believed that Orson would win in the end. However, when the two of them started to move, the situation took a turn for the worse. Orson suddenly couldn't resist and was sent flying by Li Daochong several times. It seemed that he was about to die. Not knowing what happened, Li Daochong suddenly froze and was sent flying by Orson's punch. Just when all the spectating students thought that Li Daochong would soon launch an even fiercer counterattack, Li Daochong, who was sent flying, was like an arrow that was shot out. He didn't have any intention of turning back and hurriedly flew away. Orson was feeling complacent because he had hit Li Daochong with a punch. Soon, his tanned face revealed a stunned expression. Looking at the back of the figure that disappeared in the blink of an eye, Orson was stunned. What the hell was that? Hey, come back. By the time Orson came back to his senses and shouted, Li Daocheng's figure was nowhere to be seen. At this time, many of the students who had just rushed overlooked at Orson, who was standing in the middle of the field with a baffled expression. They all had the same question in their hearts. That huge commotion just now was caused by this kid alone? After Li Daocheng received Li Qingyao's message, how could he still have the mood to continue fighting with Orson? As soon as Li Daocheng left the battle area, he immediately opened the location on his wristwatch. Li Qingyao had opened the location link with him. As long as the distance between them wasn't more than 5 kilometers, he could easily find Li Qingyao's location. Li Daocheng's face sank. The spirit energy in his body surged out violently. He stomped on the ground and shot out like a cannonball toward Li Qingyao's location. In the soaring sky hall, the first place was still Li Daocheng. Just 10 minutes ago, the points behind Li Daocheng's name increased rapidly and exceeded 15,000 points. 2 days had passed, and Li Daocheng didn't show any signs of decline. Instead, his points began to increase explosively. The voices about Li Daocheng having replaced his spirit meridians, his strength was limited, and his potential was limited. He wouldn't be able to hold on for long and would be sent back to the soaring sky hall's treatment room, began to die down. More and more recruiters from cultivation companies realized that this young man, called Li Daocheng, seemed to be far more powerful than they had imagined. After replacing one's spirit meridians, it wasn't necessarily impossible to reach the foundation establishment stage. It was just that the probability was greatly reduced. Of course, there were still cultivators who had some achievements after replacing their spirit meridians. There were even precedents of them breaking through to the yuanying stage. However, the probability was pitifully low. It was much lower than an extremely mediocre cultivator reaching the yuanying stage. Therefore, after the news of Li Daocheng replacing his spirit meridian spread, everyone no longer paid attention to him. However, 2 days had passed, and not only was Li Daocheng not sent back to the soaring sky hall, but his points were also increasing crazily. There were a few times when his points increased by more than 1,000 points. The most powerful person in the banished area, Green Ghost, only had 600 to 700 points. It was obvious that Li Daocheng's sudden increase in points was obtained by robbing other students. How could he have done it without strength? The recruiters from various cultivation companies were not fools. Being able to stand out among more than 7,000 students and maintain it for such a long time could not be explained by luck alone. All the recruiters' spiritual brain observation records placed Li Daocheng on the key observation list. He was even ranked ahead of many students in the elite class. Brother Sure, this Li Daocheng is a little strange. Could it be that the spirit meridians he replaced belonged to his father, so the rejection is very small? Xia Changing finally couldn't sit still as she looked at the name that was always in the first place. This may be. Uncertainty appeared on Shi Kuei's old face. He then whispered, Brother Xia, why don't we send an encrypted message and let Gu Chao and the others find Li Daocheng together and send him back to the soaring sky hall first? This kid has too many points now. If he hides and doesn't appear on the last day until the end of the big test, we'll have given our bet to old Yuan for nothing. All right, Xia Changing nodded. Old Shi, old Xia, what are you two whispering to each other about? A loud voice came from behind Shi Kuei and Xia Changing. The two of them jumped in fright. Turning around, they saw Qian Changhai looking at them with a smile. So it's Brother Qian. We were discussing the joint examination of 100 schools to be held next year. Shi Kuei smiled awkwardly. Chapter 80. Shi Kuei and Xia Changing could not help but shrink their necks as they scanned their surroundings. Fortunately, no one was paying attention to them. Xia Changing's face darkened as she warned, Brother Qian, there's no proof. Don't spout nonsense. Qian Changhai extended his hand, and a rock the size of a pinky appeared in his hand. He smirked and said, Do you want me to play it for you? Listening stone? Old man Qian, are you monitoring our conversation? Shi Kuei glared at him. Old man Shi, you're clearly listening openly. How can you be monitoring us? Don't spout nonsense. Qian Changhai smirked. Brother Qian, are you going to report us? Xia Changjing narrowed her eyes as she asked in a low voice. No, no. Qian Changhai shook his head like an old urchin. Then what do you want? Xia Changjing asked curiously. I want to join your bet with Old Man Yuan and change the rules slightly. If you agree, I'll destroy this listening stone after the end of term testing. If you don't agree, I'll upload this conversation to the spiritual intranet. Qian Changhai laughed. Shi Kuei and Xie Changjing looked at each other. The former asked, What are you betting with? Qian Changhai looked at Shi Kuei as if he was looking at an idiot. He replied, Can't you see this listening stone in my hand? Shi Kuei and Xie Changjing were dumbfounded. The latter said, Do you think Yuan Longji will agree if you bet with this? Qian Changhai chuckled. Of course, he'll agree. He then waved at Yuan Longji, who was on the other side. Yuan Longji walked over with a terrible expression. He glanced at Shi Kuei and Xie Changjing and asked, Do you guys agree? The duo hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yuan Longji then turned to Qian Changhai. How do you want to change the rules of the bet? Qian Changhai smiled but did not reply. Instead, he turned around to face everyone in the Flying Palace and announced loudly, Everyone, after a discussion, the three principals have decided to reward the first place in the end-of-term test with a treasure each. The Flying Palace was in an uproar. The three principals looked at Qian Changhai in shock, their hearts bleeding. How would they have thought that Qian Changhai would do something like this? A good bet was ruined by this old man, just like that. Shi Kuei and Xie Changjing felt their hearts ache, but there was nothing they could do. They had been caught, and it was not up to them. Although their hearts ached, Shi Kuei and Xie Changjing could still reluctantly accept it, because, in their opinion, the final first place would definitely come from one of their two schools. Profound Firmament University definitely had no hope. Duan Yao was still not strong enough to shake Gu Chao and A.O. Kichuan's position. Regardless of whether Gu Chao or A.O. Kichuan got the three items, they would definitely not fall into the hands of Vast Heaven University. Yuan Longji's face was terrifyingly gloomy after Qian Changhai's announcement. He wished he could tear off Qian Changhai's head and kick it like a ball. What kind of rule was this? Old man, weren't you clearly siding with outsiders? Even if one used their toes to think, they would know that the first place in the final test would be either Gu Chao or A.O. Kichuan. Neither of them belonged to Vast Heaven University. Yuan Longji's heart ached, not because of the heavy silver essence crystal. No matter how good the item was, he could still find a way to get it. However, he was really unwilling to give it to Yun Lan and Tian Hong for nothing. However, Qian Changhai also had something on Yuan Longji. Back when Yuan Longji became the principal, he had bribed the director of the Fourth Ring Star Zone's Department of Education. Not long after the announcement was made in the Flying Sky Palace, someone sent the news to the banished area of the Ghost Hunter planet. Immediately, all the students who were still in the banished area of the Ghost Hunter planet felt their blood boil. The rewards given by the three principals were the heavy silver essence crystal, the 9-split saber art, and a bottle of foundation building elixir. These three items were all priceless. They happened to be a supreme grade material, a cultivation technique manual, and a bottle of spirit elixir that could increase one's cultivation. Any student with strength wanted to get these three items. A chaotic battle was about to break out. Even some students who were not very strong started to think of other ways. In Shang City, a 7th-stage Qi Refinement Realm student from the superclass thought that he was strong. After he openly snatched 3 students' spirit cards a row, he was ambushed by 2 students from the elite class. He fainted with hatred and was sent back to the Flying Palace. 10 students from the elite class planned to work together and snatch the points. Then, they would hand them over to one student. That student would get first place, and everyone would share the reward equally. Although the students from the ordinary class were weaker, they had the advantage of numbers. Unity was strength. Under the leadership of 1 or 2 students who had the ability to rally people, they gathered in the periphery and marched toward Shang City in a mighty manner. However, they did not come here to fight for first place. When the gap in strength reached a certain level, It was not useful to rely on numbers. The students from the ordinary class did not come to Shang City to fight for first place. They came to sell the various offensive spirit talismans and materials they had brought with them. The students from the tool refining class went everywhere to buy materials and temporarily refine powerful one-time use artifacts. They would either sell them or keep them for their own use. In short, all the students moved. Some wanted to make money, some wanted to take advantage of the chaos to rise up, and some came up with the idea of killing people and robbing them. For a moment, Shang City was in chaos. Li Daochong rushed toward Li Qingyao's location. Because he was moving alone, he did not receive any rewards. After 1 or 2 minutes, Li Daochong had already arrived at Li Qingyao's location. From afar, the scene was a bit chaotic. Zhang Honglai and Yi Feiyue were locked in a fierce battle. Li Qingyao's group of 3 was surrounded by a dozen or so other rich young masters. They were barely holding on with the spirit talismans and simple spirit formations in Ouyang Qian's hands. Li Qingyao had refined a banner, but before it could even be used, it was burned by a young master's fire talisman. Lu Mei was even better. She hid behind the 2 girls with a frightened expression and did not help. Qian, I'm sorry. It's all because of me that you and Lu Mei have fallen into this mess. Seeing that the defensive spirit formation was about to be broken, Li Qingyao guiltily said to Ouyang Qian, who was still desperately resisting. Qingyao, don't say that. How could it be because of you? This group of rich young masters is the same to everyone. If you didn't meet them, we would still suffer. Ouyang Qian sent out a defensive spirit talisman to block the fire talisman. Bang! Bang! 2 fire talismans shot out in succession. Ouyang Qian's defensive spirit formation could no longer hold on and was shattered. Ouyang Qian gritted her teeth and was about to send out another large area defensive spirit talisman. Puchi! A dagger stabbed into Ouyang Qian's back. The intense pain made Ouyang Qian dizzy. She opened her eyes wide in disbelief and turned to look at Lu Mei, who was holding the dagger. Lu Mei, you. Faced with the sudden change, Li Qingyao was dumbfounded. Her face was pale as she supported Ouyang Qian and shouted at Lu Mei, Lu Mei, what are you doing? Lu Mei looked coldly at the 2 former good sisters in front of her. People die for wealth, and birds die for food. I don't want to live a hard life anymore. With my talent and family background, I'm afraid I won't be able to reach the Qi refinement realm. Qian, go back to the Flying Sky Palace first. Don't worry, Honglai promised me that he won't hurt Qingyao. He just wants to use her to humiliate that idiot Li Daochong. With that, Lu Mei withdrew her hand and pulled out the dagger from Ouyang Qian's back. The 3 of them had not been caught by the young masters because Ouyang Qian had fought with her life on the line. Once Ouyang Qian fell, all of her defenses disappeared. The young masters rushed forward and caught Ouyang Qian and Li Qingyao. Lu Mei was safe and sound, and no one touched her. One of the young masters came forward and hugged Lu Mei. He smiled and said, Lu Mei, it's all thanks to you that we were able to catch Li Qingyao this time. Young Master Zhan will definitely dote on you, haha. Li Qingyao suddenly thought of something and said in astonishment, Lu Mei, were you the one who had been leaking information to Zhang Honglai? Lu Mei didn't say anything. Ouyang Qian covered the blood flowing from her waist and said angrily, Lu Mei, you betrayed us? You stabbed your good sister in the back just to not live a hard life? Slap. One of the young masters slapped Ouyang Qian. You talk too much. Shut up. Ouyang Qian immediately spat out a mouthful of blood, but she didn't give in. Tui. Ouyang Qian spat out the blood in her mouth onto the young master's face. Mother asterisk her, you're courting death. The young master snatched the dagger from Lu Mei's hand and stabbed it towards Ouyang Qian's heart. Even though Ouyang Qian had a staunch personality, her eyes were filled with despair at this moment. Li Qingyao's face was ashen. She was held tightly by the other 2 young masters and couldn't move. She screamed, no. Lu Mei just turned her face away coldly. Whoosh! With a whistling sound, a fire talisman shot over. Boom! Chapter 81. The sudden turn of events shocked everyone present. Whoosh! A gust of wind swept past. Li Daochong appeared beside Li Qingyao. Big brother. Li Qingyao stared blankly at Li Daochong. Her small mouth opened slightly, and she suddenly called out. At this moment, even Yi Feiyue and Zhan Honglai stopped and looked at Li Daochong. Yi Feiyue looked at Li Daochong with a puzzled expression. Wasn't this the night market peddler who sold her the talisman last time? Was he also a student of Profound Firmament University? Wait a minute, Li Daochong. This name is so familiar. Isn't this the foolish young master of the Li family? Yi Feiyue looked at Li Daochong with eyes full of question marks. She never dreamed that the young man who sold the strengthened level 3 defensive talisman at the night market that night would be Li Daochong. Zhan Honglai put away the soul-drawing whip and looked at Li Daochong with a ruthless expression. The group of rich young masters was slightly dazed, but they quickly came back to their senses. The dozen or so of them looked at each other and moved to surround Li Daochong. Li Daochong, there's a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell, but you insist on barging in. You came at the right time, said one of young Master Zhan's henchmen as he looked at Li Daochong as if he was looking at a dead man. Zhan Honglai sneered and waved his hand. The group of rich young masters took out fire talismans at the same time and threw them at Li Daochong. Yi Feiyue's eyes widened. Zhan Honglai, what are you doing? Zhan Honglai didn't even look at Yi Feiyue. He waved his hand, and a red light swept towards Yi Feiyue. The latter reflexively raised her sword to block. However, the moment the red light hit the long sword in Yi Feiyue's hand, her eyes widened and her face turned pale. She cried out in alarm. Chaotic teleportation talisman. Zhan Honglai. The space around Yi Feiyue distorted, and she instantly disappeared, leaving only her half-spoken words behind. Zhan Honglai was somewhat reluctant to release the disordered teleportation talisman, but Yi Feiyue was too difficult to deal with, so it was better to send her away first. Li Daochong frowned slightly when he saw this. Then, he threw a punch at the young master closest to him. Swoosh! The rich young man's face was ashen. When Li Daochong raised his fist, he was unexpectedly unable to move. He thought he was done for. A long whip whizzed over and wrapped around Li Daochong's wrist. His fist was only a few centimeters away from Kuo Xiao. Li Daochong felt a sharp pain in his wrist, and his body went numb. The pulling force of the whip was far beyond his imagination. Zhan Honglai held the other end of the soul-drawing whip and coldly looked at Li Daochong. He said, "Stinking brat, I finally caught you." While speaking, Zhan Honglai loosened his hand. The soul-drawing whip danced like a living snake and coiled around Li Daochong. Li Daochong felt something was wrong. He wanted to shake off the whip, but it was useless. A chi refining stage cultivator couldn't break a high-grade human-level magic treasure. When Li Qingyao and Ouyang Qian saw Li Daochong appear, they were overjoyed. However, when they saw Yi Feiyue being moved away by Zhan Honglai and Li Daochong being tied up, their hearts sank again. Zhan Honglai glanced around and saw many students walking around Shang City. He couldn't kill them because it would be troublesome if they saw them. Immediately, Zhan Honglai gave a look to one of his confidants. That rich young master immediately took out a rope and tied it around Li Daochong. The others held Ouyang Qian and Li Qingyao down and walked into the wilderness. When they reached an uninhabited area, Zhan Honglai took out a flying shuttle from his storage bag. The group sat in the shuttle and flew into the sky. Li Daochong was tied to the bottom of the shuttle. 10 minutes later, they entered Ghost Mountain. Along the way, Li Daochong tried to break free from the soul-drawing whip, but to no avail. No matter how hard he struggled, the soul-drawing whip would only tighten around him. Li Daochong's body was covered in blood. The flying shuttle landed in a valley on the other side of Ghost Mountain. When it landed, the flying shuttle fiercely spun. Li Daochong, who was hanging outside the shuttle, was thrown out by the powerful inertia. Li Daochong was thrown dozens of meters away. If it wasn't for Li Daochong's strong resistance, he would have lost half his life. When Li Daochong was thrown out by the flying shuttle, he condensed his telekinesis to form a barrier under his body to reduce the force of the fall. Under the support of the telekinesis, the force of the fall was reduced by half. However, The force of the impact was still strong. With a boom, a large hole appeared on the ground. Even though Li Daocheng's body was strong, he couldn't withstand the force of the impact. The blood in his body churned, and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. However, for some reason, the soul-drawing whip on Li Daocheng's body loosened a little. Li Daocheng didn't care about his injuries. He struggled for a bit, and the soul-drawing whip immediately tightened again. Li Daocheng immediately stopped struggling. His eyes moved slightly as he had a guess. He immediately sent a telekinesis attack towards the soul-drawing whip. As expected, the soul-drawing whip loosened a little. Li Daocheng's face lit up. So that's why. Without any hesitation, he continued to attack the soul-drawing whip with telekinesis. After each attack, the soul-drawing whip would loosen a little. On the other side, the flying shuttle landed. Ouyang Qian and Li Qingyao were pushed out of the shuttle. Zhan Honglai and a group of rich young masters rushed out of the shuttle. Blood was still flowing from the back of Ouyang Qian's waist. Her face was pale and weak, but no paper cranes flew down. On the flying shuttle, the teleportation talisman on Ouyang Qian's body that was connected to the paper cranes was removed by a rich young master and destroyed in a special way. Even if she died, no paper cranes would fly down. The teleportation talismans on Li Qingyao and Li Daocheng were also destroyed in the same way. No paper cranes would come down to teleport them back to the soaring sky palace. As soon as Zhan Honglai got out of the shuttle, he grabbed Li Qingyao's hair and dragged her to Li Daocheng, who was lying in the pit far away. Li Daocheng, I said that if you dare to marry Qiao Shimo, I will make you wish you were dead. Did you think I was joking? Zhan Honglai pressed Li Qingyao to the ground. At this moment, Li Qingyao's heart was like dead ashes. Her delicate face was expressionless as she let Zhan Honglai grab her hair and shake her wantonly. One blow after another, Li Qingyao was on the verge of collapse. She was betrayed by her good sister, Lu Mei. Her other good sister, Ouyang Qian, was seriously injured and would die if she didn't receive treatment. The teleportation talisman on her was also destroyed. The many blows made Li Qingyao dazed. When the flying shuttle landed, she saw Li Daocheng being thrown from a height of tens of meters and smashing into the ground like a meteor. At that moment, Li Qingyao knew that it was over. It was all over. Li Qingyao was pressed to the ground. Her eyes were lifeless as she looked at Li Daocheng, who was lying motionless in the pit. The soul-whipping whip was mercilessly wrapped around his body. It was impossible to tell whether he was dead or alive. Zhan Honglai saw that Li Daocheng had no reaction. Bah, how boring. Is this trash dead, just like that? This young master's show hasn't started yet. What a pity. Ha ha ha, Li Daocheng. Do you want to come back from the dead? Let's see how I'll play with your sister. Zhan Honglia's expression was crazed. He held Li Qingyao down with one hand and tore off her clothes with the other. Silent tears fell from Li Qingyao's eyes. She wasn't afraid of death, but she couldn't accept dying in such a way. Li Qingyao's eyes were filled with determination. There was only one thing left for her to do, and that was to explode her spirit vein. She smiled sadly as she looked at Li Daocheng, who was lying motionless in the pit, and murmured, "I'm sorry, big brother. This is all I can do. I hope you're still alive." Li Qingyao was about to detonate her spirit vein after she finished speaking. But at that moment, Li Daocheng suddenly turned around. Li Qingyao was stunned. Before she could react, Li Daocheng's figure flashed and jumped out of the pit. Bang! A heavy punch landed on Zhan Honglia's face. The punch was shockingly powerful. Zhan Honglai was sent flying like a cannonball. With a loud bang, he smashed into the body of the flying shuttle in the distance, causing it to cave in. More than 10 rich young masters looked at this scene in shock. They called out at the same time, "Young Master Zhan." A rich young master who was tearing off Ouyang Qian's clothes froze as he looked at the flying shuttle that was almost broken in half. Chapter 82. Li Daocheng's stomp had broken a few of Zhan Honglia's ribs. If it weren't for the mid-grade mortal realm robe he was wearing, he would have been dead by now. If he hadn't been wearing a mid-grade robe, he would have fainted from Li Daocheng's stomp. Li Daocheng's sudden burst of terrifying power made Zhang Honglai feel the danger of death. The spirit energy in his body condensed and contracted. Zhang Honglai had already reached the peak of the third level of the Zhang family's secret art, Sea Collapse Art. Zhang Honglai punched Li Daocheng's leg. Bang! Li Daocheng didn't move an inch. Zhang Honglai looked at Li Daocheng, who was looking down at him in shock. That familiar face was like the descent of a demon god, dignified and cold. Li Daocheng's anger continued to burn and erupt. He exerted more force on his foot. Crack! Crack! The ear-piercing sound of bones breaking was heard. Pooh! Zhang Honglai spat out a mouthful of blood. Li Daocheng's face didn't show any emotion. His expressionless face made him look even more terrifying. Damn it! Why are you still standing there like idiots? Use the fire talismans I gave you to hit him. Ouch! Zhang Honglai cried out loudly. The dozen or so young masters didn't dare to hesitate. They all took out their fire talismans and shot them at Li Daocheng. Bang! Bang! A faint layer of light enveloped Li Daocheng, and the fireball transformed from the fire talisman bombarded the layer of light and exploded. Level 3 Enhanced Golden Bell Talisman. More than 10 Level 3 fire talismans were released, but the light shield produced by the Golden Bell Talisman showed no signs of collapsing. Level 4 Protective Talisman. Someone cried out. Bang! Li Daocheng lifted his foot and stomped down, making a muffled sound. Zhang Honglai spat out another mouthful of blood. The ruthlessness in his eyes gradually disappeared and was replaced by deep fear. Li Daocheng bent down and said coldly, Zhang Honglai, I didn't plan to do anything to you, but since you're so eager to die, I can only reluctantly send you on your way. As he spoke, Li Daocheng removed the transmission talisman from Zhang Honglai's body that was used to communicate with the paper crane. Zhang Honglai tried to stop him. Bang! Li Daocheng punched him in the face, and the back of his head hit the ground heavily, causing him to feel dizzy. The surrounding rich young masters all began to retreat. The ridicule in their eyes disappeared, and they looked at Li Daocheng in fear. The group of Green Wolf Society members no longer had their previous arrogance. They were like stray dogs with their tails between their legs. Zhang Honglai couldn't even fight back in front of Li Daocheng, let alone them. When Li Daocheng glanced at them, a rich young master cried out, Li Daocheng, don't mess around. My family is very powerful in Tianyuan City. If you dare to touch me, my family won't let you off. That's right, Li Daocheng. If you dare to touch us, let me tell you, if young Master Zhang loses a single hair today, you'll die a horrible death when you return a Blue Bay star. Another rich young master echoed. Li Daocheng looked at them indifferently. He didn't really want to kill them at this time. Li Daocheng, let young Master Zhang go. Suddenly, a shout came from behind. Li Daocheng turned his head to look. With a bang, the anger that had just subsided rose again. Zhang Honglai's trusted follower, Chun Puhua, held Li Qingyao hostage from behind. Another rich young master held Ouyang Qian hostage. Both girls had a sharp knife on their necks. Let them go, Li Daocheng said coldly. Let young Master Zhang go first. Chun Puhua increased the force of a knife in his hand. A bloody mark was left on Li Qingyao's white neck, and blood flowed down. Li Daocheng didn't hesitate and attacked with his telekinesis. Ha! The invisible telekinesis was blocked by an invisible wall 1 meter in front of Chun Puhua and disappeared. Chun Puhua saw that Li Daocheng was so powerful. He cautiously took out his life-saving trump card. Psychic Wave Robe. Chun Puhua spent a lot of money to buy it. After storing spirit energy, it could last for 10 minutes and form a psychic wave robe, protecting everything within a 2-meter radius with him as the center. Not only could it block physical attacks, but it could also block magic and telekinesis attacks. Chun Puhua heard a pa sound. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that Li Daocheng must have used some kind of trick. He sneered. Fortunately, he activated the psychic wave robe in advance. Otherwise, he would have fallen into Li Daocheng's trap. Li Daocheng's eyes revealed a trace of surprise. He didn't expect the other party to be able to block his telekinesis attack. However, Li Daocheng had consumed a lot of his telekinesis in order to undo the soul whipping whip. A man-tier, superior-grade Dharma treasure wasn't easy to deal with. He had consumed 2/3 of his telekinesis. The telekinesis attack, just now, was only 30% of Li Daocheng's full power. Li Daocheng, if you don't release young Master Zhan, I will stab your sister every 3 seconds, Chun Puhua said fiercely. The rich young masters around them, who had a look of fear on their faces, saw that Chun Puhua had grasped Li Daocheng's weakness. They immediately became spirited and ran behind Chun Puhua. Li Daocheng, did you hear that? Quickly release young Master Zhan. Yes, quickly release him. The rich young masters clamored one after another. When Chun Puhua saw that Li Daocheng didn't have any intention of lifting his leg, he raised his hand and stabbed Li Qingyao's arm. Li Qingyao clenched her teeth and didn't make a sound. Blood gushed out from her arm, but she didn't even frown. She only felt that she was useless and had become a burden to Li Daocheng. Li Daocheng released his leg. Zhan Honglai stood up shakily, clutching his chest, and quickly ran to Chun Puhua's side. After being stepped on by Li Daocheng in public, Zhan Honglia's lungs were about to explode. At this moment, he was burning with rage. He snatched Li Qingyao from Chun Puhua's hands, pushed Chun Puhua aside, and clasped Li Qingyao's neck with one hand. Li Daocheng, if you don't want your sister to die, then kneel down and cut your own throat. Chun Puhua, who was pushed away, staggered back 2 steps. His expression changed, and he knew that things weren't looking good. As soon as he was pushed away, the psychic wave wall also moved. He immediately shouted, "Young Master Zhan, be careful." He wasn't afraid of a godlike opponent, but he was afraid of a pig-like teammate. Chun Puhua even had the thought of dying. The situation that he had managed to control with great difficulty had turned into nothing under Zhan Honglia's push. Before Chun Puhua's voice fell, Zhan Honglia's body went numb, and his consciousness went blank in an instant. Li Daocheng took advantage of this opening to launch a telekinesis attack. His figure flashed and appeared in front of Zhan Honglai. Zhan Honglai didn't react at all. Li Daocheng pushed away the hand clasping Li Qingyao's neck and sent Zhan Honglai flying with a punch. Bang! Crack! Dong! In the blink of an eye, all the members of the Green Wolf Society had been beaten down by Li Daocheng. Some of the weaker ones couldn't even withstand a single punch from Li Daocheng and fainted. Li Daocheng quickly removed all the teleportation talismans from their bodies. This time, he didn't dare to be careless. He first moved Li Qingyao and Ouyang Qian some distance away to check on their injuries. Li Qingyao's injuries were relatively light and weren't serious. She only had a stab on her arm and a bloodstain on her neck. Ouyang Qian's injuries weren't optimistic. Lume had stabbed her in the back and injured her vitals. If she didn't receive treatment soon, her life might be in danger. Li Daocheng took out a bottle of spirit liquid and poured it into Ouyang Qian's mouth. Then, he gave her a teleportation talisman that he had just snatched and said, "Go back to the soaring sky hall first." Ouyang Qian shook her head weakly. She grabbed Li Daocheng's hand and begged, "Don't teleport me back. Can you help me? If I teleport back before the end of the beta test, I won't have any points or ranking. I still want to get a good ranking. If I can't get the attention of a cultivation company this time, it'll be very difficult for me to find a good job in the future." Li Daocheng looked at Ouyang Qian's determined eyes and nodded. "Then you rest first. I'll come back to help you treat your injuries after I've dealt with those bastards." With that, he got up and left. Ouyang Qian looked at Li Daocheng's back with an indescribable look of amazement on her face. The once useless and foolish young master had actually become so powerful. Zhan Honglai couldn't even withstand a single blow from him. In a daze, Ouyang Qian recalled the time when she brought Li Daocheng into the underground city. Perhaps he was already very powerful at that time, but she just didn't know it. Zhan Honglai was lying on the ground in the distance, coughing violently with one hand covering his face. Li Daocheng had punched half of his face, causing it to cave in. "Zhan Honglai, I think it's time for us to settle our accounts." A cold voice came from above Zhan Honglai. Looking up, Li Daocheng punched again. Bang! Zhan Honglia's body was buried deep into the ground. Li Daocheng grabbed one of Zhan Honglia's legs and pulled him out of the mud pit. He flung Zhan Honglai hard. Bang! He crashed into the ground on the other side, creating another mud pit. Bang! 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 Grabbing Zhan Honglai's leg, Li Daochong slammed it up and down on the ground like a whip, creating a series of terrifying muffled sounds. After more than 10 slaps, he let go. Chapter 83. Li Daochong gazed at the dying Zhan Honglai. He stretched out his hand, and the unused Zamadeo appeared in his hand. Li Daochong slowly raised the Zamadeo, a cold glint flashing through his eyes. Just as Li Daochong was about to bring down his blade, an absurdly powerful aura of dead souls came whistling from the edge of the valley. The rolling waves of air were accompanied by ghostly howls. The dozen or so signs of the Green Wolf Society turned pale as if they had seen the end of the world. Ouyang Qian had just recovered from her injuries. The moment the aura of dead souls appeared, her blood and chi roiled, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. The wound on Li Qingyao's arm quickly oozed pus and spread. Under the influence of the aura of dead souls, she lost all feeling in her arm. Li Daochong didn't have time to bring down his blade before the aura of dead souls hit him in the face. He had no choice but to circulate his chi to resist it. The saber he was slashing at Zhan Honglai turned to the aura of dead souls. Zing! The aura of dead souls was split in two. It swept past Li Daochong, but quickly gathered together and rolled into the distance. Run! It's a soul-devouring green wolf ghoul that's about to evolve into a great ghoul. Yi Feiyue's voice came from the distance. A beautiful figure hurriedly ran down from the ghost mountain. Behind her was a ghost shaped like a giant wolf, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. The soul-devouring green wolf ghoul was the king of the green ghouls. One more evolution and it would become a great ghoul. A top-grade green ghoul was almost unshakable to chi refinement cultivators. Its dense aura of dead souls could kill low-level chi refinement cultivators. No matter how talented Yi Feiyue was, she was nothing more than a delicious meal in front of the soul-devouring green wolf ghoul. Li Daochong's eyes flashed with shock. He didn't expect such a powerful dark ghoul to appear in the banished area. Without hesitation, he raised his saber again to kill Zhan Honglai. But just as Li Daochong raised his saber, a beam of light flashed through the gray sky. With a bang, it struck Li Daochong's wrist. "Brat, don't you know that killing is prohibited in the end-of-term testing? Do you want to be disqualified?" A dull voice came. Whoosh! A man in green robes descended from the sky. He was standing on a green longsword. He appeared to be in his 30s. The members of the Green Wolf Society and Zhan Honglai heaved a sigh of relief when they saw the newcomer. Regardless of whether it was Li Daochong or the soul-devouring green wolf ghost chasing after Yi Feiyue, they weren't opponents they could deal with. Regardless, their lives to spare the ghouls twos die. And Li's. To heaven's twos to the green, Li to him. The in his he Li's Li. Was to Li's. To his. To this to his to meet to death. The of his. By to Li to kill of his. To Li to the he. To kill to the of. The young man coldly snorted. No matter what happens, it ends here. After speaking, he no longer looked at Li Daochong. Instead, he shifted his gaze to Yi Feiyue, who had already fled to the foot of the mountain. The soul-devouring green wolf ghoul was still chasing after her. The young invigilator was puzzled. A green ghost king-level dark ghost actually appeared in my area. What are the lecturers in charge of clearing the banished area doing? After encountering the soul-devouring green wolf ghoul, Yi Feiyue, who had always been arrogant, no longer had her usual arrogant demeanor. Her face turned pale as she fled. Yi Feiyue was teleported by Zhan Honglai to the side of a cave on Ghost Mountain. She didn't know where she was, so she didn't dare to stay for long. After confirming that she was still in the banished area, she immediately left the mountain and prepared to return to Shang City. However, as Yi Feiyue walked, she realized that she had returned to her original spot. She immediately knew that something was wrong. She knew that she had most likely entered the ghost realm. She immediately took out all her trump cards to break the ghost realm. However, before she could break it, a soul-devouring green wolf ghoul appeared in front of her. Yi Feiyue didn't even think before turning around and fleeing, searching for the ghost eye in the ghost realm. Fortunately, Yi Feiyue wasn't an ordinary qi condensation cultivator. Otherwise, she would have died without a doubt. It took her a Herculean effort to escape from the ghost realm. Although the ghost realm was broken, the soul-devouring green wolf ghoul's pursuit became even more frenzied. Yi Feiyue ran all the way down the mountain. When she saw Li Daochong and the others, she issued a warning. Just when Yi Feiyue thought that it was over, a green light shot down from the sky. The Invigilator finally discovered the abnormality and came to intervene. The young Invigilator opened his palm, and a talisman that contained a vast amount of qi appeared in his hand. He activated his telekinesis. With a swoosh, the spirit talisman turned into a ray of light and shot out. Wherever the light passed, the dead soul qi was completely annihilated. With a boom, the spirit talisman shot onto the soul-devouring green wolf ghoul's body. An ear-piercing howl resounded through the sky. The soul-devouring green wolf ghoul's body showed signs of collapsing and was killed with a single strike. The young Invigilator stepped on a flying sword and landed in front of the soul-devouring green wolf ghoul that was about to collapse. He reached into the ghoul's body and grabbed a black crystal. Dark core. A physical core began to condense within the body of a green ghost king and above. It was similar to a human's heart and was the core of a dark ghost. The young Invigilator put away the thumb-sized dark core, turned around, and glanced at everyone. His face darkened as he said sternly, "All of you listen up. If anyone tries to kill their own kind again, they will be disqualified from the exam and expelled from cultivation. From now on, they will not be allowed to enter any cultivation university. I will personally shatter their spirit veins and hand them over to the Federation's Cultivator Security Bureau. Since this is your first offense, I will give you a warning. Each of you will have a teleportation talisman. If anyone has an extra one, throw it away. I will watch over you." With that, the young Invigilator threw down 3 teleportation talismans and flew into the sky on his flying sword. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Seeing the 3 teleportation talismans, the corners of the young master's eyes twitched. It turned out that their every move had been seen by the Invigilator. They all felt that there was a pair of omnipotent eyes looking at them from the sky. Their every move was being monitored. The young masters all felt a chill run down their spines. They thought that their plan was flawless, but now it seemed that it was just a joke. Even if Li Daochong wasn't strong enough, as long as they tried to kill him, the Invigilator would appear at the last moment and send them all back to the Flying Sky Palace. The Invigilator was usually a lecturer from a cultivation school on another cultivation planet and belonged to the Federation's cultivator government. No matter how powerful their family was, they couldn't compete with the cultivator government. Li Daochong coldly glanced at Zhan Honglai. It was impossible to kill him now. He took out the teleportation talisman he had just snatched and threw it away. He turned around and walked to Ouyang Qian and Li Qingyao's side. When the young masters saw the teleportation talismans, they all ran forward to pick one up and put it on their bodies. The uneasy feeling from before disappeared. Li Daochong checked the 2 girls' injuries. Li Qingyao was fine, and although Ouyang Qian's injuries were serious, her life was no longer in danger after taking the healing spirit liquid. Li Daochong's heart relaxed slightly. The young masters didn't dare to deal with Li Daochong anymore. Even without the Invigilator's warning, they weren't Li Daochong's match. The group of young masters helped Zhan Honglai up and prepared to leave. However, they had just taken 2 steps when Li Daochong's cold voice came from behind them. "Stop right there." Chen Puhua was shocked. He turned around and looked at Li Daochong with deep fear in his eyes. He held his breath and said, "Li Daochong, what are you trying to do?" Just now, the Invigilator said that you're not allowed to kill your own kind during the big test. Do you want to be disqualified from the big test, have your spirit vein destroyed, and be thrown into prison? Li Daochong sneered. Are you going to hand over your spirit cards? Or Do you want me to beat you all back to the flying palace? Uh. The group of young masters' faces stiffened, and they were speechless. Zhan Honglai couldn't even withstand one move from Li Daochong, let alone them. However, with so many students from the elite class facing a student from the ordinary class, they really couldn't afford to lose face if they obediently handed over their spirit cards. Give it to him. Zhan Honglai suppressed the anger in his heart and covered his face as he said this. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhan Honglai was the first to hand over his spirit card. The others looked at each other and threw their spirit cards down one after another. Then, they took out another flying shuttle and left. Young Master Zhan, are you going to give your spirit card to that kid just like that? A young master sitting in the flying shuttle said unwillingly. If I don't give it to him, can you beat him? Zhan Honglai's face was gloomy. There are so many of us. If we take out all our trump cards and fight to the death with him, it's hard to say who will win. At worst, both sides will suffer, and he won't be able to gain any benefits, the young master said unwillingly. What good will that do for us? Where there's life, there's hope. We'll snatch the points of the other students. There's only one day left, and it's enough for all of us to return to the top 200. The currently Daochong is no longer someone we can deal with. Zhan Honglai didn't believe it in his heart, but he had to face reality. Just let it go? Humph, of course not. We'll talk about it when we return to Blue Bay Star. There will be plenty of opportunities to deal with him. With the strength of our dozen or so families, there are plenty of ways to kill him. There's no need to rush. I'll definitely make him pay double for this debt. Zhan Honglai's eyes flashed with ruthlessness. Li Daochong picked up the dozen spirit cards and looked at the points on each spirit card. The smallest one had more than 1,000 points, and the 16 spirit cards together had more than 20,000 points. Yi Feiyue stood in the distance and looked at Li Daochong. Her eyes were full of astonishment. She couldn't understand why that group of usually arrogant and despotic playboys would be so terrified in the face of Li Daochong. They actually obediently threw away their spirit cards and left. After fighting with Zhan Honglai, Yi Feiyue was astonished at how fast his strength had increased. He had definitely reached the level of the elite class. Zhan Honglai was so proud and arrogant that even he had succumbed to Li Daochong's despotic power. Yi Feiyue was amazed. Something must have happened between them. Could it be that the injury on Zhan Honglai's face was caused by Li Daochong? Yi Feiyue looked at Li Daochong with a mysterious look in her eyes. While she was in a daze, Li Daochong had already carried Ouyang Qian out of Ghost Valley. Yi Feiyue hurriedly chased after them. Li Daochong, do you still recognize me? Li Daochong carried the weak Ouyang Qian on his back. He kept turning his head to look at Yi Feiyue and said indifferently, I don't recognize you. Yi Feiyue's charming face suddenly became awkward. There was also a trace of disappointment, the disappointment of being forgotten. A month ago, weren't you selling talismans at the night market? Li Daochong thought for a moment and immediately recognized Yi Feiyue. You're the girl who bought my talismans? Yi Feiyue's face lit up with joy. She nodded repeatedly. Yes, it's me. Ouyang Qian, who was lying on Li Daochong's back, stared blankly at Yi Feiyue, who was chasing after Li Daochong like a little girl chasing after a celebrity. One must know that Yi Feiyue had always been Ouyang Qian's idol. She stood at the peak of mysterious heaven, a goddess of war who could only be seen from afar. Usually, Yi Feiyue was rarely seen. Occasionally, she would be lucky enough to meet her. The aura she emitted was enough to make anyone who wanted to get close to her retreat. But at this moment, Yi Feiyue was following Li Daochong. She didn't have her usual aloof appearance. She was clearly a little girl chasing after a celebrity senior. Why was Yi Feiyue looking at Li Daochong with eyes full of admiration? Chapter 84. Ouyang Qian naturally didn't know why Yi Feiyue respected Li Daochong so much. In fact, ever since Yi Feiyue bought Li Daochong's level 3 golden bell spirit talisman in the night market, she had been thinking of ways to find a vendor who sold it to her. After more than a month, Yi Feiyue couldn't find any traces of the vendor in the night market even after using her family's power. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Just when Yi Feiyue had given up on searching, Li Daochong appeared out of nowhere. She naturally knew a thing or two about this foolish young master's deeds. She had never paid much attention to such people, but she never thought that Li Daochong was the vendor she had met in the night market. It turned out that the vendor she had been looking for many days went to the same school as her. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, Yi Feiyue wouldn't have been able to connect Li Daochong with the vendor from that day. The world was unpredictable, and sometimes it was just so mysterious. Therefore, when Yi Feiyue saw Li Daochong, the shock in her heart could be imagined. Li Daochong's past deeds made Yi Feiyue even more certain of the strangeness of the master behind Li Daochong. The way a great hidden person handled things wasn't something an ordinary person could understand. In Yi Feiyue's opinion, Li Daochong's stupidity in the past might have been caused by his master. Great wisdom may appear to be stupidity. When Li Daochong's threat made Zhan Honglai and his group of hedonistic sons throw away their points and spirit cards, they didn't even dare to let out a fart and leave. Yi Feiyue's thoughts of befriending Li Daochong were like a torrential river that couldn't be stopped. A person who could create an enhanced version of the spirit talisman was definitely not ordinary. At the same time, it was even more amazing to be able to leave no traces on the spirit net. As a descendant of a great family, Yi Feiyue was very certain of the power of the mysterious master behind Li Daochong. Yi Feiyue had been influenced by the elders of her family. The Yi family wasn't considered a big family on Blue Bay Star, and their family strength was on par with the Zhan families. But in terms of heritage, the Zhan family was far inferior to the Yi family. The Yi clan might not have a particularly powerful person, but they had an intricate network of relationships. Thanks to the Yi clan's respect for the wise, they were able to rope in a powerful cultivator who had been famous for a long time. However, this kind of relationship was not reliable. The members of the Yi family knew the true meaning of providing help in times of need rather than icing on the cake. Newcomers who were not strong but had great potential were the targets of their attention. The Yi family preferred to invest in people with great potential. In the future, when these people grew up, that kind of relationship would be unbreakable. The people the Yi family interacted with were all true friends, not fair-weather friends. Talismans were very important to cultivators as they could only be used once. Regardless of whether it was a qi condensation cultivator who had just stepped in the cultivation world or a soul formation cultivator who had the power to destroy the world, they would all use talismans. Offensive talismans were equivalent to bullets and grenades. They were very powerful, convenient to use, and didn't consume any spiritual energy. Defensive talismans were equivalent to carrying a protective shield. Even if you were at the first level of qi condensation, as long as you had a protective talisman at the 5th level or above, even a foundation establishment cultivator would be able to protect you from an all-out attack. That was how awesome it was. However, talismans were difficult to make. Low-level talismans had a certain degree of difficulty, let alone high-level talismans. Before the spiritual brain appeared, talismans could only be made by rune masters using a talisman brush. The process of making talismans was extremely slow. An outstanding rune master could make a dozen low-level talismans in a day, and a high-level talisman could not be made without several days. Beyond the 4th level, the production cycle was basically calculated in months. After the spiritual brain appeared, the difficulty of making talismans was greatly reduced, and the production speed significantly increased. However, it was still impossible to mass-produce talismans. The spiritual brain obtained information through the arrangement of the spirit sequence, used tens of thousands of telekinesis to simulate the path of the spirit pattern to obtain the result, and then drew it on talisman paper, greatly reducing the drawing process and accuracy. Even so, talismans could not be mass-produced. Low-level talismans could be mass-produced, but high-level talismans could not be mass-produced. The higher the level of the talisman, the more complex and precise the spirit pattern. Simply copying the spirit sequence was just copying. After the first success, the next talisman would drop in level, and the next one would be even more trashy. This was because every copy would have a flaw in the spirit sequence. Therefore, high-level spirit sequences could only be formed once, and high-level talismans were unique. It was precisely because of this that spirit sequencer became a respected profession after artificers and alchemists. After Yifei took the initiative to talk to Li Daochong, he nodded slightly, turned around, and sped up, carrying Ouyang Qian on his back as he ran toward the outskirts of the banished area. Yifei followed along without saying a word. When they reached the outskirts, Li Daochong sensed that there were no other students around. The dark ghosts were almost all gone, so he put Ouyang Qian down to treat her injuries. Spirit energy could stop bleeding, replenish qi, and speed up the healing of wounds. It was faster than any healing medicine. Li Daochong placed one hand on Ouyang Qian's back and sent a steady stream of spirit energy into her body. The wound on her back was healing at a visible rate. As long as she was not contaminated with death energy or poison, sending spirit energy to treat injuries was one of the most convenient and fast methods. An hour later, Ouyang Qian's pretty face had regained much of its color, and her eyes were filled with vitality. She was no longer as powerless as before. Li Daochong was sweating profusely, and his back was drenched in sweat. Transferring spiritual energy to the injured was a blessing for the injured, but for the one transferring the spiritual energy, it was a huge burden, and the consumption was huge. Thus, under normal circumstances, cultivators were generally unwilling to put in the effort to treat injuries for no reason. Yifei was curious to see Li Daochong working so hard to treat Ouyang Qian. She softly asked Li Qingyao, "Is Ouyang Qian your brother's woman?" Li Qingyao looked at Yifei with a strange expression. She didn't know why she would suddenly ask such a question, but she calmly replied, "Nope." "Then what is your relationship?" Yifei curiously asked. "Classmate." Li Qingyao was a little disgusted by Yifei's puzzled expression. She knew what Yifei was thinking. In the eyes of these descendants of big clans, doing things that were not profitable was incomprehensible. Although Li Qingyao also grew up in the Li family, she was, after all, picked up by Li Tianyong. "Oh." Yifei's eyes flashed with surprise. She didn't expect Li Daochong to treat Ouyang Qian for no reason. After adjusting her breathing, Ouyang Qian had basically recovered. Li Daochong, on the other hand, closed his eyes and sat cross-legged to recover his spirit energy. 3 hours later, Li Daochong slowly opened his eyes. Yifei and the other two didn't disturb him and stood guard for him. Although the periphery of the banished area was relatively safe, there were still some short ghosts wandering around. Ouyang Qian and Li Qingyao were fine, but Li Daochong found it strange that Yifei was still there. "Yifei, you're not going to Shang City? The test will end in half a day. Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to enter the top 500 if you stay here?" Yifei blinked and smiled. "I'm not going. Don't you have a lot of point spirit cards?" As soon as these words came out, Li Daochong, Ouyang Qian, and Li Qingyao all became vigilant. Could it be that Yifei wanted to rob them? Li Daochong's aura suddenly changed. Yifei felt the hostility of the three and knew that they had misunderstood her meaning. She quickly said, "You don't need that much. I can buy some from you. The price definitely won't disappoint you." Li Daochong's eyes relaxed and he smiled. He was very interested in Yifei's proposal. He did have a lot of point spirit cards on him, and it was precisely because of this that he left Shang City and came to the periphery. The total points on these point spirit cards were too much for Li Qingyao and Ouyang Qian to use, let alone him. "How many do you plan to buy?" "I'll pay 100,000 Federation coins for 10,000 points. It's 10 per point. Are you selling?" Yifei said with a smile. When Ouyang Qian and Li Qingyao heard Yifei's price, they were both stunned. "It's too little," Li Daochong said indifferently. The two girls instantly shifted their gaze to Li Daochong. Their small mouths opened and their big eyes widened in disbelief. "Too little? Big brother, 100,000 is too little? How much do you want?" Yifei was stunned for a moment. Seeing Li Daochong looking at her calmly, she felt a slight pain in her heart. However, When she thought about having a friend who could make high-level spirit talismans in the future, she gritted her teeth and said, 150,000 at most. If I want to enter Shang City and rob, half a day is enough to get that many points. Chapter 85. More and more students were teleported into the Flying Palace's healing room. After 3 days, more than 2,000 students had been teleported back. Some had light injuries, some had serious injuries. Some had been forced to withdraw early for fear of being beaten up, or they had run into powerful dark ghosts that they couldn't deal with, and had fled back to the Flying Palace for fear of being tainted by the death aura. The number on the spirit card for withdrawing early was the final score. Some of the students with serious injuries were lying in the healing liquid. Many hadn't woken up yet, and some probably wouldn't recover in a week. There were only 3 hours left before the final test of the 3-school joint end-of-term test. The Ghost Hunting Planet was about to end. The hundreds of recruiters on the Flying Palace platform couldn't remain calm anymore. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the name in the first place on the huge spirit screen. The 3 words, Li Daochong, were so dazzling at that moment. As early as a few hours ago, nobody had mentioned the replacement of the spirit vein, much less cared about Li Daochong's past. This name had already been recorded at the top of the observation list. The 7 major cultivation companies who had remained calm earlier were now deeply interested in Li Daochong. The lecturers and professors of the 3 major cultivation schools were all astonished, especially the lecturers of the 2 schools other than Mysterious Firmament. No matter how hard they racked their brains, they couldn't find any information about Li Daochong. This student was like a clap of thunder on the horizon, appearing out of nowhere and shocking everyone. It was common for 1 or 2 dark horses to appear in each major test, but no dark horse had ever soared into the top 10, let alone first place. However, Li Daochong had rushed to first place not long after the major test began and stayed there for more than 2 days. Some people said that he wouldn't last an hour before being slapped in the face. Some people said that he would last half a day before being slapped in the face again. Others said that at most half a day before the end of the major test, Li Daochong would definitely be beaten back to the Flying Palace's healing room. There were only 3 hours left before the end of the major test, and they would be slapped in the face again. That was not all. Just half a day ago, an invigilator had sent a video that he had recorded using the spirit camera mirror to the Flying Sky Hall's spirit screen. On the screen, Orson was fighting with a student wearing the Xiansong Ordinary Classes training uniform. The 2 of them faced off against each other for several minutes without moving a single step. The recruiters and lecturers in the Skysoar Hall were all astonished. Orson's strength could be considered a genius in the entire Blue Bay Star. After a few minutes of bombardment, the 2 sides finally started to move. Orson was at a disadvantage the moment his feet moved. He was fiercely hammered by the student wearing the training uniform of the ordinary class. One of the elders from the house of Oku who had come to observe felt his face turn red. He clenched his teeth in hatred and secretly scolded Orson for not cultivating properly and embarrassing the clan during the end-of-term examination. This scene lasted for less than 10 minutes, and it ended with the student wearing the training uniform of the common class borrowing the force to leave. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that the student seemed to have something else to do and left because he was not in the mood to continue fighting. Otherwise, defeating Orson would only be a matter of time. The recruiters all asked who the student wearing the Xiansong Ordinary Classes training uniform was. They did not know if they did not ask, but they were shocked when they asked. It was Li Daochong. Suddenly, the entire Skysoar Hall was in an uproar. All the recruiters swarmed to the lecturers of Xiansong University to find out more about Li Daochong's situation. However, these lecturers did not know anything about Li Daochong. All of them had a confused look on their faces. They knew nothing about him. One by one, the headhunters fell into a dead end. A rising star had been placed in front of them for 2 whole days, and they had been indifferent. They only started to investigate when the major test was about to end. However, when they started to investigate, they found that there was no information about this new star. It was too late for regrets. The headhunters and recruiters saw that there was not much time left but they did not have any information about the student ranked first. They were as anxious as ants on a hot pan. If the heavens could give them another chance, they would offer the most generous conditions to that student. If they had to go one step further than this condition, they would generously gift an Earth-grade, low-grade magic treasure. Every time the headhunters and recruiters raised their heads and saw the name still ranked first on the spirit screen, they would bitterly regret their past. They felt that they had let down the company, their boss, and their profession. However, these people's professionalism was not to be questioned. Soon, some people found out about this through asking some of the Xiansong University's students who had returned to the Skysoar Hall with light injuries. The matter of Li Daochong training in Xiansong University's training hall's training room 2 months before the major test was dug up. The headhunters also found out that Li Daochong did not go to class for 2 months. However, it was not counted as an absenteeism because a lecturer came forward to help him apply for leave. Who was this lecturer? The headhunters began to display their professionalism, digging deeper into the information bit by bit. Finally, someone found Xiansong University's first-class lecturer, Qin Yubing, and learned that the one who asked her for leave was Xiansong University's only special class lecturer, Chu Qianyue, in the entire Blue Bay Star. For a moment, everyone woke up. It turned out that this unknown Li Daochong had long been discovered by the famous battle sword Augustine's personal lecturer, Chu Qianyue of the Blue Bay Star. No wonder he could amaze the world with a single brilliant feat during the major test. It turned out that he had long been prepared. It was just that he had been keeping a low profile. With the mystery solved, the headhunters finally found the source. Therefore, they swarmed everywhere to look for Chu Qianyue's figure. After looking around, they did not find Chu Qianyue's figure on the Skysoar Hall's platform. The headhunters did not give up and continued to search, until a crazy old man shouted loudly, "If you want to know about Li Daochong's situation, ask this old man." All the headhunters who were searching for Chu Qianyue looked over at the same time. Qian Changhai, who had successfully attracted everyone's attention, smiled proudly. He could finally make the headlines. Tomorrow, the picture on the front page of all the major media outlets would definitely be his glorious, dignified image. Qian Changhai, deputy dean of Xiansong University's Cultivation School, discovered the next battle sword Li Daochong. Qian Changhai started to drool as he imagined how the media would flatter him. "Look, Chu Qianyue is over there," someone shouted. The eyes of the headhunters lit up as they saw a tall and beautiful woman with a cold expression walk out of the treatment room. Who else could it be but Chu Qianyue? Buzz. The headhunters rushed over like a swarm of bees. Dust and smoke rose everywhere they passed, and they instantly surrounded Chu Qianyue. "Hello, Teacher Chu. May I ask how you discovered Li Daochong, this seedling?" "Teacher Chu, your eyes are so sharp. Do you have some unique secret method that can see through a person's potential?" "Teacher Chu, congratulations on discovering another cultivation genius after 9 years. Can you tell us the difference between Li Daochong and Battle Sword Augustine? Or are the two very similar?" "Teacher Chu, can you give us a basic introduction to Li Daochong's cultivation?" A flood of questions came from different mouths from all directions like a barrage of cannonballs. Behind the group of people, an old man in ragged clothes was lying on the ground. His body was trembling nonstop, and there were countless footprints on his back. One of his shoes was missing, and the hair on the back of his head was flattened. Qian Changhai's lips trembled. "Quick, call an ambulance." But right now, no one was paying attention to Qian Changhai. All the headhunters were focused on Chu Qianyue, wanting to get information about Li Daochong from her. Chu Qianyue frowned. She was very disgusted by the headhunters who had suddenly gathered around her. She said coldly, "Get out of my way." A crow flew across the sky. The headhunters looked at Chu Qianyue in confusion. Suddenly, someone recalled the scene when a reporter interviewed Chu Qianyue after Battle Sword Augustine had amazed the world. That reporter was almost thrown into the Blue Bay Strait by Chu Qianyue. After that, no one dared to harass Chu Qianyue again. Li Daochong, who was in the banished area of the ghost hunting planet, naturally did not know what had happened in the Flying Sky Palace. Right now, he was standing under a black locust tree in the outer area, quietly waiting for the end of the big test. Yi Feiyue was sitting cross-legged not far away. Although Ouyang Qian and Li Qingyao's injuries had almost recovered, they were still not completely healed and needed to continue regulating their breathing. 5 of Li Daocheng's point spirit cards were sold to Yi Feiyue for a total of 10,000 points. The remaining 11 spirit cards added up to more than 16,000 points. Most of them were given to Ouyang Qian and Li Qianyao, while he kept more than 5,000 points for himself. Li Daocheng's point spirit card now had 21,076 points, which was an unprecedented high score in the end-of-term big test of the Blue Bay Star. In Shang City, all the children of the Li family were looking for Li Daocheng's traces. They went all the way from the outer area to the inner area, and then to Shang City. Li Tianyao even vowed that he would take Li Daocheng down and serve him according to the family rules. However, until the time of the big test was up, Li Tianyao still did not see Li Daocheng's shadow. When the time was up, flashes of light appeared in the banished area. All the students' transmission talismans were activated at the same time. A few seconds later, more than 4,000 students appeared on the platform of the Flying Sky Hall. The rest were in the healing room. As soon as Li Tianyao appeared in the Flying Sky Hall, the first thing he saw was Li Daocheng, who was not far from him. He smiled sinisterly and immediately went to greet him. Li Tianyao had obtained a total of more than 12,000 points in the big test this time, and had beaten 5 students of the superclass back to the Flying Sky Hall. Li Tianyao was very satisfied with his performance in the big test this time. He estimated that his final ranking would definitely be within the top 10. In the past, the most powerful person in first place only had 15,000 points. Li Tianyao was certain that after today, he would become the most dazzling star of the Li family and the most outstanding representative of the Blue Bay Star's younger generation. Next year, he would represent the vast Heaven Society in the 4 Ring Star region's 100 schools joint examination and become the focus of training. In addition, he was a member of the Li family. His status could not be mentioned in the same breath as before. He could trample on a piece of trash like Li Daocheng however he wanted, and no one would have any objections. Chapter 86. Li Tianyao didn't try to hide his voice at all. He wanted everyone to hear him so that he could show off his high status and identity. The students standing between Li Daocheng and Li Tianyao automatically opened up a path. Most of them were looking at the two of them with the mentality of watching a good show. Li Daocheng glanced at Li Tianyao. He had almost forgotten about this person. Only now did he remember that there was such a rival. The Li family was no longer important to him. As for the past grudges, Li Daocheng didn't want to seek revenge for the smallest grievance. They were born from the same root, so there was no need to kill each other so quickly. This was the first sentence Li Tianyao said to Li Daocheng after knowing that his strength was extraordinary. Although the family was at fault, blood was thicker than water. Li Tianyao didn't want Li Daocheng to fight to the death with the Li family because of him. What was the difference between a man and a ghost if there was only hatred left in his heart? In fact, even if Li Tianyao didn't tell Li Daocheng, he wouldn't say that he wanted revenge for the past discrimination. Everything he did now was to have enough strength to protect the people around him and achieve his goal of becoming the strongest cultivator. Even without the hot-blooded level-up device, Li Daocheng would do his best to achieve his goal. Moreover, he had such good conditions and foundation now. If he didn't work hard, what was the point of living? Li Daocheng wouldn't allow himself to become a shit-making machine no matter what. Now he only wanted to move forward toward his goal. Even if he couldn't achieve it in the end, it didn't matter. He would do his best and leave the rest to fate. At least he worked hard and tried. This was worthy of his second chance at life. Li Daocheng turned a deaf ear to Li Tianyao's shouts. He didn't have time to deal with a fly flying around. The only thing he cared about was the ranking. When Li Daocheng saw that his name was firmly in the first place, the corners of his mouth inadvertently rose slightly. Then he looked at Chu Qianyue, who was standing at the edge of the platform of the Flying Palace in the distance. At this time, Li Tianyao had already walked in front of Li Daocheng. He looked at the latter with contempt and sneered. Didn't you hear what I said? Kneel down and apologize. Everyone here can be a witness. Ha ha. Li Daochong looked at Chu Qianhua. He wanted to get affirmation and praise from his teacher's face. As for Li Tianyao, he didn't care at all. Unfortunately, there was no change in Chu Qianhua's cold and beautiful face. After exchanging a glance with Li Daochong, she quickly moved her eyes away. Her pair of elegant eyebrows slightly wrinkled, as if she was not very satisfied with Li Daochong's result. Li Daochong was a little puzzled. His goal was to be in the top 20. He had rushed to first place, exceeding the target. Was Teacher Chu still not satisfied? Li Tianyao saw that Li Daochong's eyes were not on him, but elsewhere. He was annoyed and was about to explode. Li Xiandong suddenly ran over and pulled Li Tianyao with a dull face. He wanted to let him see the ranking on the spirit screen. Li Tianyao didn't understand. When he saw Li Xiandong come over, he immediately pulled him back and said, Xiandong, you came just in time. Tell me how you want to deal with Li Daochong. I'll help you vent your anger. When Li Xiandong heard Li Tianyao's words, his face twisted. He was about to cry. If Li Daochong was still Li Daochong, it was needless to say that he would torture him to death. But Li Xiandong never dreamed that the first place on the spirit screen would be Li Daochong. Even if he didn't believe it 1,000 times, the truth was right in front of him. 3 days ago, during the spirit vein test, Li Xiandong was already shocked. But at the time, he didn't care too much. After all, Li Tianyang was now back. It wasn't strange for him to use those old tricks on Li Daochong. He even used some unknown secret method to change Li Daochong's physique. The Li family had already guessed that Li Daochong would have some changes, but they estimated that Li Tianyang would at most make Li Daochong an ordinary cultivator. Even if you beat him to death, Li Xiandong would never have thought that Li Daochong would be able to get first place in the end-of-term exam. Li Xiandong didn't know how Li Daochong got first place, but no matter what the reason was, as long as he got first place in the end-of-term exam, entering the elite class was a done deal. Even if he used his toes to think, he knew that countless cultivation companies would fight to get him. Li Daochong's status would undergo an earth-shattering change. The Li family couldn't be easily provoked. Talents with potential were protected by the Federation government. At this moment, Li Daochong had become incomparably tall in Li Xiandong's eyes. Li Tianyao wanted to teach Li Daochong a lesson for him. Li Xiandong complained incessantly. He couldn't stand still and looked at Li Daochong with an uncertain gaze. Li Tianyao wasn't someone he could offend. At this moment, he regretted it so much that he wanted to find a hole to crawl into and never come out again. Li Daochong withdrew his gaze from Chu Qianhua and looked at Li Tianyao. He said indifferently, "For your own good, it's best if you stay away from me. Don't bring shame to the family." Hearing this, Li Tianyao flew into a rage. What right did a fool who had been kicked out of the family have to say such words to him? Mother of Asterisker, Li Daochong, why are you showing off in front of me? You're the family's biggest disgrace. Li Tianyao cursed and was about to make a move. But before he could finish speaking, an ice-cold female voice came from his side. Daochong, do you want me to help you get rid of this annoying fly? Yi Feiyue walked to Li Daochong's side and stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Her pretty face carried an ice-cold expression as she looked at Li Tianyao with disgust. Huh? Li Tianyao's expression froze, and he subconsciously let out a cry of surprise. What the hell? Li Tianyao was a bit unable to react. The anger he was about to unleash was immediately suppressed. Facing Yi Feiyue, this proud daughter of heaven, Li Tianyao was clearly half a head shorter. However, he couldn't understand why Yi Feiyue would suddenly appear to speak up for Li Daochong. What kind of situation was this? In Li Tianyao's eyes, these two people were a pair that couldn't be related at all. It didn't make sense. Yi Feiyue, this is our Li family's matter. It has nothing to do with an outsider like you. I advise you not to meddle in other people's business. Li Tianyao was afraid of Yi Feiyue in his heart, but he couldn't show it on his face. In any case, the Li family was still one of the 4 great families. No matter what, he couldn't show his fear in front of others. Family matter? Didn't the Li family already announce to the public that Li Tianyang and his son are no longer related to the family? Why are you saying that it's a family matter now? Don't you think it's funny? From now on, Senior Li Tianyang is our Yi family's guest. Li Daochong is his son. You say I'm meddling in other people's business? Yi Feiyue sternly said. When Li Tianyao heard this, he was dumbfounded. When did Li Tianyang become the Yi family's guest? Li Daochong inadvertently shot a glance at Yi Feiyue. He was also confused by her words. The latter sensed Li Daochong's confusion. She tilted her head and playfully stuck out her tongue at Li Daochong while blinking her large eyes apologetically. Yi Feiyue had said this on the spur of the moment in response to Li Tianyao's words. However, with her status as the Yi family's #1 successor, she still had the authority to invite a guest. Li Daochong had long seen that Yi Feiyue had taken the initiative to approach him. Moreover, she had repeatedly expressed her goodwill. He knew that it was definitely because of the strengthened Grade 3 protective talisman from last time. Even though he knew that Yi Feiyue had approached him with a purpose, Li Daochong didn't feel disgusted. This last wasn't afraid of the Li family's power and bravely stepped forward to help him. She even didn't hesitate to offend the Li family. This was enough to show that she was sincere in befriending him. Yi Feiyue's meaning was very clear. This young lady wanted to befriend Li Daochong. Your enemy is my enemy. You can see whether we're brothers or not. Seeing Yi Feiyue's blinking eyes, Li Daochong faintly smiled and nodded, expressing that he didn't mind Yi Feiyue acting on her own initiative. Li Tianyao stared blankly for a few seconds and was momentarily speechless. How did Li Tianyang become the Yi family's guest? How come I didn't know about this? Yi Feiyue, the Li family kicked Li Tianyang out of the genealogy when the military announced that Li Tianyang had betrayed the army. However, after learning that my second uncle was wrongly accused, the family has already put him back into the genealogy. Li Tianyang and Li Daochong have always been members of the Li family. Don't try to cover it up. Your Yi family has the freedom to invite anyone as your guest. It has nothing to do with the Li family. However, the Li family's domestic affairs have nothing to do with you. Don't tell me that you want to interfere with the Li family's domestic affairs. Interfering with the internal affairs of other clans is tantamount to a clan invasion. Could it be that your Yi clan wants to declare war with our Li clan? Li Tianyao was stunned for a short while before coldly smiling and speaking with reason. Yi Feiyue didn't expect that Li Tianyao would suddenly magnify the issue to the point of a family war. Her elegant brows wrinkled. Although it was somewhat troublesome, she wasn't afraid. Just as she was about to retort, Li Daochong's indifferent voice interrupted her. I'm no longer a member of the Li family. Li Tianyao was feeling proud of his well-founded counterattack against Yi Feiyue. However, Li Daochong's few simple words had turned everything he had just said into a fart. Li Tianyao was immediately flustered and exasperated. Li Daochong, you traitor! Do you want to be a traitor like your father? You all heard it. Li Daochong said he's no longer a member of the Li family. Good, very good, very good. What do you think the family is, Li Daochong? A vegetable market? You come and go as you please. Leaving the family without permission is considered a traitor. Today, I will represent the family to clean house. With that, Li Tianyao raised his fist and fiercely smashed it towards Li Daochong's face. At this time, Li Qianxing, who was secretly plotting with Zhang Jintian, looked over and suddenly cried out, "Stop!" But it was already too late. Li Daochong frowned. He originally didn't want to have a conflict with Li Tianyao, but the latter kept pestering him in an overbearing manner. After splashing dirty water on him, he immediately took action. Li Daochong's eyes glinted coldly. Just as he was about to take action, a beautiful figure flashed. Yi Feiyue had already blocked Li Tianyao's fist. The two of them simultaneously retreated 3 steps. Li Tianyao steadied himself and was about to rush forward again when he suddenly heard a shout. Found him! Li Daochong is over there! Immediately, a group of people swarmed over, pushing the students aside and scrambling to get in front of Li Daochong. Li Tianyao was pushed far away. He stared blankly at the crazy headhunters with a baffled expression. His eyes turned into two small dots. On the side, Li Xiandong carefully pulled Li Tianyao and said, "Uncle, the final ranking on the spirit screen is out." Chapter 87. Li Tianyao stood there like a block of wood. His eyes were bulging and his mouth was wide open, trembling slightly. No, impossible. It wasn't just Li Tianyao. Most of the students stared blankly at the rankings on the spirit screen after they were teleported back to the flying palace, their faces full of disbelief. How could Li Daochong be first? Everyone was screaming in their hearts. How is this possible? The impact of this name appearing in first place was so shocking that no one cared about the rankings below. Even Gu Chao, who was second behind Li Daochong and also had a high score of 19,800, was ignored. In the flying palace, the headhunters who had finally found Li Daochong were extremely excited. They couldn't wait to kidnap this biggest dark horse in history and hide him in their cultivation companies. Li Daochong was currently surrounded by 3 layers of people inside and outside. The headhunters bombarded him with questions one after another. Some people even offered Li Daochong to join their companies in public. Just as Li Daochong looked helpless and didn't know how to deal with this group of overly excited headhunters, a deep voice was heard. "Everyone, please exercise restraint and return to your seats. Don't mess up the process. I will now announce the rankings and prizes for this beta test." Yuan Longji stood at the front desk and looked down at the headhunters of the major cultivation companies who were almost crazy. It wasn't that he hadn't expected such a scene. It was just that he never dreamed that the person being surrounded would be Li Daochong, the foolish young master who had been abandoned by the Li family. Yuan Longji had also heard rumors about Li Daochong. In his mind, such a student was nothing more than the black sheep of the school. If it weren't for the sake of money, Yuan Longji would never have allowed such a student to appear in the school. But now, the student he thought was the black sheep had become first place in the beta test. Even now, Yuan Longji still suspected that the ghost hunting planet's banished area wasn't strictly supervised, and that a powerful cultivator had concealed his aura and sneaked into the banished area to help Li Daochong obtain points. However, there was no way to investigate at the moment. They could only wait until after the matter was over before conducting an in-depth investigation. Shi Kuei and Xie Changjing both had gloomy expressions on their faces. Their hearts were filled with an uncomfortable feeling. They had already accepted that Vast Heaven University had obtained first place, but they had never even heard of the student who had obtained first place. Yuan Longji's voice wasn't loud, but it rang clearly in everyone's ears. The headhunters knew the rules, so they had to let Li Daochong go for the time being and return to their seats. "Li Daochong, first place in this beta test. Please come to the front desk to receive your prize." No matter how unwilling Yuan Longji was, he couldn't go back on his word in front of so many people. It was just that giving 3 prizes to a student like Li Daochong made him feel uncomfortable in his heart. The students standing below opened up a path, and Li Daochong walked out of the crowd. Li Daochong was tempted when he found out that the first place on the ghost hunting planet would receive 3 extra prizes. However, he knew how difficult it was to obtain first place. Therefore, Li Daochong didn't have much hope and only did his best. He didn't expect that he would obtain such a high score in the end. To a certain extent, Zhang Holia's introduction had helped him a lot. Not only did he obtain a large amount of points, but he also easily obtained first place. Otherwise, he didn't know how long it would have taken to fight Orson. Even if he won, Li Daochong would have suffered a great loss. At that time, if Zhang Honglai appeared again, Li Daochong would be in an extremely dangerous situation. Li Daochong was suddenly excited when he walked to the front desk. When the 3 prizes were placed in front of him, he really wanted them. The heavy silver essence crystal, 9 split saber art, and foundation elixir were all very useful to him. It didn't matter if he sold them or kept them for himself. His current weapon of choice was also a saber. Li Daochong didn't know any other cultivation techniques other than the basic cultivation technique. He might be able to hold on for a while in the qi refining stage, but in the qi gathering stage, relying on the basic cultivation technique alone, he might not even be able to take a single blow from others. The qi gathering stage and the qi refining stage were two completely different worlds. Among the students, Hui Shaoling covered her arm and looked at Li Daochong in astonishment. At this moment, her intestines turned green with regret. Hui Shaoling followed Hongwu. The first 2 days were safe, but in the last half of the day, Hongwu was besieged by several students from the elite class from the other two schools. He couldn't even take care of himself, let alone Hui Shaoling. In the last 3 hours, Hongwu directly abandoned Hui Shaoling and slipped away by himself. As a result, Hui Shaoling was chased and beaten by another student from the elite class. If she didn't have several life-saving trump cards on her, she would have been beaten to a pulp. In the end, after using up all her trump cards, Hui Shaoling had no choice but to use her own teleportation talisman to return to the Flying Sky Hall. Following Hongwu didn't bring her any benefits. In the end, her score stopped at 900 and she was ranked 538. She didn't even make it into the top 500. In Hui Shaoling's opinion, no matter how strong Li Daochong was, it was impossible for him to be stronger than Hongwu. But when she returned to the Flying Sky Hall and saw the score behind Li Daochong's name, she was stunned. Until now, she still hadn't come back to her senses. When she saw that Li Qingyao was ranked 130th, she felt terrible. On the second day on the ghost hunting planet, Hui Shaoling used her family's sensing artifact to track down Li Daochong's approximate location. She had a chance to find a new backer. In the end, she chose Hongwu. Student Li, congratulations on coming in first place in this exam. These 3 prizes are an affirmation of your first-year cultivation results. I hope that you will continue to work hard in the future and build your foundation as soon as possible. You will become a cultivator and contribute to the Shanghua Federation's resistance against the Hades as soon as possible, Yuan Longji said in a businesslike manner. However, his eyes were still full of suspicion when he looked at Li Daochong. After speaking, Yuan Longji was about to pass the 3 prizes to Li Daochong when someone in the crowd suddenly shouted, "I object." As soon as the voice fell, several voices came from different directions, rising and falling one after another. "I object too." "Me too." Everyone looked puzzled. The voices of objection came from the crowd of students, and there were at least dozens of them. Yuan Longji's hand paused. Shi Kuei, who was beside him, rolled his eyes and said, "Why do you object?" The 3 principals inadvertently looked at each other. They seemed to see the possibility of taking back the prizes. The value of the prizes that the 3 of them took out was not ordinary. It was inevitable that they would feel the pinch if they gave them away for nothing, especially to a student like Li Daochong. They were even more unwilling. Li Daochong violated the rules of the exam. When he was snatching points on the ghost hunting planet, he was ruthless and almost killed a student. Chun Puhua walked out of the crowd of students and looked coldly at Li Daochong as he said this word by word. "Oh." Shi Kuei expressed his doubts. The way he looked at Li Daochong became unfriendly. His turbid eyes narrowed slightly, and he was secretly delighted. As long as a student accused someone of killing another person, an investigation must be conducted. If the investigation turned out to be true, the first-place qualification would be revoked, and the serious cases would be taken away by the Security Bureau for investigation. This student, you have to be responsible for what you said. I don't know if you have evidence. If you don't, you are slandering me. Xie Changjing sounded like a warning, but in fact, she was testing the informant. Yes. As Chun Puhua spoke, he raised the watch in his hand and projected a video. The entire video was very short, lasting only a few seconds. In the video, Li Daochong raised the Zamadeo in his hand and was about to cut down a student who had lost the ability to resist. As soon as the video was shown, there was an uproar in the Celestial Hall. Only Zhan Honglai had an ugly expression on his face because the student who had lost the ability to resist was his son, Zhan Honglai. Looking at the video, Li Daochong frowned. He didn't expect Zhan Honglai's group to have such a trick up their sleeves. Student Li, you actually dared to be so ruthless to your own classmate. If you become a cultivator one day, will you also kill your companions and comrades? How are you any different from the Dark Ghost if you are so ruthless? Yuan Longji said in a low voice. Principal Yuan, don't you think it's a little too arbitrary for you to come to such a conclusion based on a few seconds of footage? They were the ones who wanted to kill me first. I was just defending myself. Should I stretch out my neck for others to kill me? Li Daochong didn't expect Yuan Longji to come to such a serious conclusion based on a video. He couldn't help but ask angrily. Impudent! Impudent! How dare you speak to your senior like that? Putting aside Headmaster Yuan's identity, just based on his age, he could be your grandfather. In front of so many people, you dare to talk back to your senior. In private, you can imagine. Li Daochong, you shameless bastard. You still dare to quibble with irrefutable evidence. What right is trash like you have to get first place? Chen Puhua shouted. Before Chen Puhua's voice fell, a beautiful figure flashed over. Pa! A crisp sound resounded through the celestial hall. Half of Chen Puhua's face was swollen and 3 of his teeth had fallen out. He looked at Chu Qianyue, who had suddenly arrived with a terrified expression. Next time you speak with a dirty word, be careful or I'll break your mouth. Chapter 88. Li Daochong looked at Chu Qianyue with slight surprise. He didn't expect that Chu Qianyue, who had always been indifferent to him, would stand up for him at this time. A dignified special class lecturer dares to punish a student in public. Chu Qianyue, isn't this inappropriate? Li Yanbin said angrily after receiving Zhang Jintian's hint. Chen Puhua covered his face in anger but didn't dare to say anything. Everyone knew Chu Qianyue's name. She wasn't someone he could afford to offend. Li Yanbin, a country has its laws, a family has its rules, and a school has its rules. Our Xiansong University has been established for hundreds of years and has always been strictly disciplined. As a first-class lecturer of Xiansong University, you should know how to punish people who spread rumors, slander, right? Qian Shanghai said with a smile. Of course I know. Spreading rumors, slandering our school depends on the severity of the case. If the case is light, the punishment will be slapped. If the case is heavy, the punishment will be the destruction of the spirit vein and handed over to the Cultivation Safety Bureau. Li Yanbin immediately replied. But after he finished speaking, Li Yanbin's eyes revealed a trace of doubt. He didn't know why Qian Shanghai, who had always been indecent, would suddenly come out and ask him this question. It was a bit baffling. In that case, Chu Qianyue, why did you say that you were punishing a student? This student only released a few seconds of video and concluded that Li Daochong was guilty. If this isn't slander, then what is? The Shanghua Federation pays attention to the cultivation law. Our Xiansong University wouldn't judge a student guilty just based on 1 or 2 videos. Am I right, Li Yanbin? Qian Shanghai's smile on his old face became even wider. After Chu Qianyue slapped Chen Puhua without saying anything, everyone present was somewhat angry. But after listening to the conversation between Qian Shanghai and Li Yanbin, their expressions changed a bit, and they assumed a stance of waiting to see what would happen. Li Yanbin couldn't say anything. He turned to Chen Puhua and asked, Do you have any other evidence? Chen Puhua even had the heart to die at this moment. Originally, he thought that with the Zhang family as his backing, he could easily pull Li Daochong down with just a few words. The 2 teachers, Li Yanbin and Tian Bo, were both frequent guests of the Zhang family. Their relationship was extremely good. With both sides working together, Li Daochong's first place would definitely be ruined. But Chen Puhua never dreamed that Chu Qianyue would slap him in the face. Obviously, she wanted to help Li Daochong. That aside, even the vice dean of the Cultivation Academy, Qian Shanghai, had stepped forward to speak up. Although he wasn't clearly siding with Li Daochong, once he stepped forward, there was no way the matter could be brushed off half-heartedly. When Chen Puhua turned to look at Zhang Honglai in the crowd, he was about to cry. Right now, he didn't know what to do at all. Zhang Honglai was very shrewd. As soon as he saw that things weren't right, he retreated into the crowd and didn't stick his head out anymore. He had just received a message from Zhang Jintian telling him not to touch Li Daochong for the time being and to wait until he got back. Chun Puhua was dumbfounded when he saw Zhang Honglai take a few steps back after glancing at him and disappear into the crowd. Student, I'm asking you a question. Where are you looking? Is there any other evidence? Li Yanbin frowned. Chun Puhua turned around and braced himself. No, that's all I got. Li Yanbin was furious. He glared at Chun Puhua and said, That's all you got? Chun Puhua nodded. His expression was tangled up. He wanted to cry, but had no tears. He shouted in his heart, Teacher Lian, can you stop asking me? Li Yanbin was also angry. You brat, you only have so little evidence in your hands, and you dare to King testify against Li Daochong? Is there shit in your head? After Li Yanbin received Zhang Jintian's message, he thought that the Zhang family had already set everything up and had solid evidence of Li Daochong killing other students. He didn't expect that this wasn't the case at all. Zhang Jintian just wanted to use his position to bully Li Daochong. If Li Daochong didn't have anyone behind him, then it would be fine. Li Yanbin could make Li Daochong fall into eternal damnation with just a few words. But now, everyone knew that Li Daochong was a genius discovered by Chu Qianwei. Zhang Jintian knew this, but he didn't have absolute confidence and ordered a stupid student to testify against Li Daochong. Zhang Jintian, aren't you King trying to harm me? You want to embarrass me in front of so many people? Li Yanbin's face was ashen. He turned around and glanced at Zhang Jintian. Sure, Kuei and Xie Changing couldn't say much about the internal affairs of Vast Heaven. However, the two old men saw that the items they released might be taken back. With just a few words from Qian Changhai, it seemed like it was going to be ruined. Naturally, they were unwilling. However, in front of so many people, they couldn't use their status to suppress people. They could only use this as a pretext. Since the student had testified against Li Daochong and even took a picture of the murder, it at least meant that there was a conflict at the time. As for the ins and outs of the matter, there might be other secrets. However, no matter what secrets there were, the fact that Li Daochong was ruthless in killing people existed. Sure, Kuei saw that Li Yanbin didn't speak, so he said, I think it's better to ask the Invigilator to come over and ask. Although the spirit eye isn't allowed to be opened, everything that happens in the banished area is under the Invigilator's supervision. The Invigilator will record some images according to the situation. Maybe it's the cause and effect of the conflict between Li Daochong and this student. When this was said, Chun Puhua really wanted to bang his head against the wall and die. Zhang Honglai, who was hidden in the crowd, had an even more serious expression. He felt uneasy. His father had sent him a message saying that the spirit eye had been closed, but he had asked him to pay attention to the Invigilator. In the end, Zhang Honglai thought that he could hide from the Invigilator's eyes by driving the flying shuttle into the Ghost Valley. Who would have thought that he had underestimated the Invigilator's strength? Even that kind of nook and cranny was monitored by the Invigilator. As soon as Sure Kuei finished speaking, Xie Changing whispered a few words to a female lecturer beside her. Then, the female lecturer walked down from the front desk and went to the lounge behind the Flying Sky Hall. Not long after, more than 10 Invigilators walked out. One of the young men was the Invigilator who had stopped Li Daochong from killing Zhang Honglai. He was Wang Guanglei, a third-grade lecturer at Scarlet Sun University, the #1 famous school on Scarlet Sun Planet. He was a new lecturer who had just joined the school and did not have much experience. This time, he had been assigned the difficult task of invigilating the Blue Bay Stars end-of-term test. He would not be able to sleep for 3 days and 3 nights. If anything happened within the scope of invigilation, it would be his responsibility. After Sure Kuei explained the situation, Wang Guanglei's face showed a hint of surprise. The way he looked at Li Daochong changed. He did not expect that this student would actually be #1 in the end-of-term test. What did it mean to be #1 in the end-of-term test? Wang Guanglei, who had just become a third-grade lecturer, was very clear about it. In the future, there was a very high chance that he would succeed in building his foundation. Even if he was unlucky and did not step into the ranks of cultivators, it could be said that he would reach the Qi gathering realm. At worst, he could stay in the school and become a lecturer like Wang Guanglei. If he was lucky, he could even work in a large cultivation company. There was no need to talk about his status and identity. In short, he would definitely surpass Wang Guanglei. Wang Guanglei was only a student of the elite class on Scarlet Sun Planet and had never entered the top 50 in the end-of-term test. After knowing the ins and outs of the matter, Wang Guanglei smiled slightly and said, "In my invigilation area, there were some extreme conflicts. Student Li Daochong did make a ruthless move on a student, but I stopped him." As soon as he said this, there was an uproar in the Sky Sur Hall. All the students looked at Li Daochong with anger in their eyes. Killing a fellow student was unacceptable to most of the students. The group of headhunters looked at each other in dismay. They began to reevaluate Li Daochong in their hearts. No matter how talented a person was, if he had a problematic temperament, he would be troublesome to work with in the future. No cultivation company would be willing to hire a person who did not have the spirit of teamwork. Chun Puhua's tearless expression suddenly froze. The corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a sinister smile. His heart was set. With the invigilator's words, Li Daochong's #1 spot was gone. He would definitely be investigated. Zhan Honglia's heart was even more shaken. His hidden figure stood up a little more. He had a sinister smile on his face, as if he could already see the scene of Li Daochong being held accountable, convicted, and having his #1 spot taken away. Chu Qinyue's cold and beautiful face revealed a trace of unconcealable anger. She looked at Wang Guanglei with an unfriendly expression. After 2 months of getting along with him, she was very clear about this brat Li Daochong's personality. This guy would definitely not kill someone for no reason. Qian Changhai's face, which had been smiling all this time, became somewhat stiff. As the person involved, Li Daochong's face was calm. If this invigilator did not distinguish right from wrong and slandered him, then there was no need for him to cultivate in this kind of education system. As for the #1 spot and the prize, he did not need it. He had his own level-up system, so he could cultivate anywhere. Li Daochong was not the least bit afraid of being investigated. A straight foot is not afraid of a crooked shadow. He wanted to kill Zhan Honglai, but that was because Zhan Honglai wanted to kill him first. He even took Li Qingyao and Ouyang Qian as hostages. Oh, so Li Daochong really did violate the rules of the major testing? Shi Kuei's eyes lit up. He seemed to have already seen the Foundation establishment liquid he had given away for no reason return. Not really. Wang Guanglei took a deep breath. Everyone suddenly pricked up their ears. Shi Kuei was stunned for a moment. He did not expect this young invigilator to change the topic. Could he not keep people in suspense? Shi Kuei's old face twitched slightly. Wang Guanglei did not say anything. He just raised his watch and played a video. Li Daochong was tied to a flying shuttle and thrown out. The whole video took about 10 minutes. The cause and effect of the whole incident was played word for word. Zhang Jintian had already quietly left the VIP seats when the video was halfway through and left from the back. Zhan Honglia's face turned green and white. The scene of him being completely abused by Li Daochong was shown to everyone. It also included the scene of the Green Wolf Society's group of playboys holding Ouyang Qian and Li Qingyao hostage. When the scene of Chun Puhua threatening Li Daochong and stabbing Li Qingyao with a knife appeared, someone in the student group cursed. Bastard. Chun Puhua's vision went black. He fell to the ground and fainted. Zhan Honglia's legs went soft. He lost his balance and sat on the ground. The meaning of shooting yourself in the foot was perfectly illustrated at this moment. Chapter 89. After Wang Guanglei finished replaying the entire incident, he didn't say anything. He turned off his wristwatch and stood to the side, inadvertently glancing at Li Daochong. Li Daochong glanced at Wang Guanglei too. The latter smiled and stood to the side with his hands behind his back. The headhunters in the Sky Ascension Hall were excited once more. Li Daochong wasn't afraid of coercion and bravely saved people, disregarding his own life and death. For a cultivation company, this kind of behavior was more important than potential growth value. The students of the 3 schools looked at Li Daochong in a new light, especially those from Xuanzang University. Many students who had been bullied by the members of the Green Wolf Society applauded him. Only some students from the elite class looked at Li Daocheng in surprise. Zhang Hongyi's strength might not be the best, but he was one of the top students in Blue Bay Star. His strength was definitely around the top 20. Before the big exam, the news that Zhang Honglai had broken through to the 9th stage of Qi refinement had already spread. Many students from the elite class didn't take the initiative to provoke Zhang Honglai after collecting the information. However, Zhang Honglai couldn't even take one move from Li Daocheng. The gap between their strength was like a chasm. Some students knew that Li Daocheng had a slight advantage in the fierce battle with Orson. Immediately, they looked at Li Daocheng with more respect. After Qiao Sinuo was sent back to the Flying Palace, he stood among the crowd and stared blankly at the spiritual screen. Until now, he still couldn't believe that Li Daocheng had won first place. It felt like a dream. How could a silly young master who had been abandoned by his family be so strong? Li Daocheng had been holding back, silently enduring the ridicule and discrimination from the people around him. How much patience and determination did it take? In Qiao Sinuo's opinion, Li Daocheng must have been hiding his strength for some reason. Otherwise, there was no way to explain his sudden outburst. After all, even the 3 superstars of Blue Bay Star, Gu Chao, Okikin, and Orson have been suppressed by him. Is Li Daocheng really my brother-in-law? Qiao Sinuo suddenly felt unreal. Qiao Sinuo wasn't the only one. All the other girls looked resentful. Qiao Shima has made a killing this time. Isn't that so? Who knew that Li Daocheng would be so strong after replacing his spirit vein? Young Master Zhan couldn't even take a single punch. Don't you think that Li Daocheng is actually quite handsome? Fair and clean, with well-defined facial features. Come on, it's too late to say anything now. Li Daocheng is already taken. So what if he's taken? It's not like the Federation forbids divorce. Besides, it's normal for powerful cultivators to have several dual cultivation partners. It's a bit early to say that. It's true that Li Daocheng has become powerful, but I'm afraid it's not certain that he can build his foundation. As long as he doesn't build his foundation, no matter how powerful he is, he's just a cultivator. He's still far from a cultivator. The girls argued among themselves. Many of them regretted that they didn't get close to Li Daocheng back then. Behind a group of girls, Yi Renfei sat in a wheelchair with an extremely gloomy expression. Li Xuemei looked at Li Daocheng on the podium in shock. The silly guy in her memory had now become the focus of everyone's attention and obtained the highest honor among the younger generation of Blue Bay Star. First place in the final exam. Li Xuemei's mood was complicated at the moment. She couldn't explain it clearly. Xuemei, I heard that Li Daocheng pursued you in high school. A girl suddenly turned to look at Li Xuemei and asked. That's right. At that time, Li Daocheng was fascinated by Xuemei. Unfortunately, Xuemei didn't like him. A girl from a big family said sarcastically. Some things are just so mysterious. When it's right in front of you, you feel that it's sticky, so you try your best to get rid of it. When you really get rid of it, you realize that what you've gotten rid of is gold. When you want to pick it up again, it's already too late because someone else has already picked it up and taken it away. Another pretty girl with a bulging chest rolled her eyes at Li Xuemei. This girl had some history with Li Xuemei, so her voice was especially loud. Yi Renfei's expression was extremely gloomy. On the ghost hunting star, he had been attacked by 3 students from other schools and was injured. If he hadn't used the teleportation talisman to come back, he would have died. However, even though he had kept his original points, Yi Renfei's ranking had plummeted to below 200. Because Li Xuemei didn't go to Shang City and instead hunted dark ghosts in the outer and inner regions, she ran away whenever she encountered a strong enemy. In the end, she obtained more than 5,000 points and was ranked 133rd, much higher than Yi Renfei. Why aren't you saying anything? Are you regretting following me and not choosing that fool? Yi Renfei waited for the girls to leave before asking in a low voice. Renfei, don't think too much. I don't think so. Li Xuemei gritted her teeth and replied. You don't think so? If you don't think so, then why aren't you saying anything? Li Xuemei don't think that I don't know that you didn't want Li Daochong because he couldn't provide you with any more resources, but I can. Don't pretend to be pure in front of me, Yi Renfei said coldly. Renfei, you... Li Xiaomei was so angry that she couldn't speak. Even Li Xiaomei herself didn't know if she regretted it or not. In short, seeing Li Daochong become the focus of everyone's attention, there was an indescribable feeling in her heart. Li Xiaomei was also a member of the Li family, but she belonged to the side branch, while Li Daochong was the main branch. Because Li Xiaomei's father was Li Tianyang's subordinate, the two of them were often together since they were young. It could be said that they were childhood sweethearts. After they grew up, they developed feelings for each other. At that time, Li Daochong really treated Li Xiaomei as his own woman. Although he was a little stupid, he was very loyal and pure in love. He would grant Li Xiaomei's every request. Unfortunately, Li Xiaomei was ambitious. In addition to wanting to reach the foundation establishment stage, she wanted to find a powerful male cultivator as a partner, rather than marrying a mentally disabled person and spending the rest of her life with him. Of course, for the current Li Daochong, everything in the past was just a memory, nothing more. Bitch, do you want to do the same thing again and abandon me to find Li Daochong? The more Yi Renfei spoke, the angrier he became. Renfei, I didn't. How can you say that? Tears flickered in Li Xiaomei's eyes, and her voice trembled as she replied. Still trying to quibble. Don't think that I don't know what you've been thinking about for the past year. Even if you didn't think about Li Daochong, I'm afraid that you had someone else in your heart before. You saw that my cultivation was increasing very slowly in the past year, and I wasn't a native of Blue Bay Star. My family's influence isn't here, so your attitude towards me was clearly much colder. You didn't even go with me during the end-of-term exam, causing me to be ganged up on and beat up. You still say that you didn't? Yi Renfei's eyes were bloodshot. Renfei, don't say anymore. I really didn't. I just felt that my strength wasn't enough to contend against the students of the elite class. I didn't want to take the risk, but you refused to listen to me, Li Xiaomei explained. Blue Bay Star's elite class is a joke. How can a mere fourth-class cultivation planet compare to me, who comes from a third-class cultivation planet? Li Xiaomei, I'll tell you the truth. I was just sent to a small place like Blue Bay Star to gain experience. In a few months, my aunt will come to pick me up and remove the seal on my body. At that time, I will let the entire Blue Bay Star know what a true genius is. Gu Chao and Ao Kachuan are just jokes. As for this Li Daochong, I can easily destroy him with a single finger, Yi Renfei said fiercely. Renfei, don't make wild guesses. Since I chose you back then, I won't be disloyal. Please believe me, Li Xiaomei said with a pleading tone as she held back her tears. It's best if it's like what you said. Otherwise, with the power of our Yi family, let alone your Li family, even the entire Blue Bay Star won't be able to withstand a single finger of our Yi family, Yi Renfei said disdainfully. On the platform, Li Daochong naturally didn't know about the conversation between Li Xiaomei and Yi Renfei. Of course, he didn't need to know. The ins and outs of the entire incident were already very clear. Li Daochong was just defending himself. Although it was a little excessive, it was still pardonable. At the very least, it wasn't considered a violation of the rules of the beta test. On the contrary, it was Chun Puhua, Zhan Honglai, and the other hedonistic sons who had deliberately kidnapped Li Daochong. The facts were clear, and the evidence was conclusive. However, these playboys all had powerful families behind them. If it was just one of them, it might not be a big deal. However, with more than 10 of them together, even the 4 great families would have to think twice about it. Therefore, even though the evidence was conclusive, no one dared to expose the matter. The entire Sky Soaring Hall fell into a deep silence. Yuan Longji didn't show the slightest bit of joy that his school's student had obtained first place. Instead, he felt that it was very troublesome. It was good that Li Daochong had won first place and became a hot commodity, but this hot commodity was very hot. Li Daochong had offended so many families. Yuan Longji knew very well how powerful these families were when they joined forces. Because this was a collective incident, Even if the evidence was conclusive, he couldn't expose it. Otherwise, he would be going against more than 10 families. Among them, 2 or 3 families had very deep ties with some families on third-class cultivation planets. Even the Cultivation Security Bureau couldn't afford to offend them. When Yuan Longji saw that Shirkuei and Xie Changjing didn't speak, he narrowed his eyes and said, since Li Daochong didn't break the rules, he's still the first place of the major examination. However, due to some disputes, the previously promised prize won't be awarded to him for the time being. I hereby announce that the major examination is officially over. Let's return to Blue Bay Star. Wait a minute. As soon as Yuan Longji finished speaking, Li Daochong's indifferent voice was heard. Everyone was stunned and looked at the first-place winner who had garnered a lot of attention in this major examination. Li Daochong, if you feel that this matter wasn't handled properly, you can file a complaint after returning to Blue Bay Star. It's getting late. You should go back. Yuan Longji stared at Li Daochong as he spoke. There was a hint of warning in his eyes. Kid, that's enough. Don't push your luck. You've already obtained first place. What else do you want? Principal Yuan, Zhan Honglai, and Chen Puhua ganged up with a group of students to kidnap and kill me. Are we just going to let it go like this? Li Daochong said word by word. Li Daochong, we will investigate this matter in detail when we return to Blue Bay Star. For now, we will put this matter aside and give you an explanation, Yuan Longji said in a deep voice. There was a trace of displeasure on his old face. I want an explanation now. Li Daochong's eyes were filled with determination. He ignored Yuan Longji's threat. The atmosphere in the Skysoar Palace suddenly became tense. In the VIP seats, the group of hedonistic young masters and elders who had been invited to observe all glared angrily at Li Daochong, thinking that this kid was too ignorant. Li Daochong knew very well that if he didn't resolve this matter in front of so many people, this matter would be completely forgotten when they returned to Blue Bay Star. Li Daochong knew that now was the best time for him to get rid of this group of people in one fell swoop. If he missed this opportunity, it would be very troublesome. As long as he could convict them first, he would have more time. Chapter 90. What kind of explanation do you want? Yuan Longji asked with a gloomy face. Kidnapping hostages and attempted murder. Why didn't you inform the Security Bureau now? Why did you cancel the prize for first place? Li Daochong looked at Yuan Longji and questioned him without the slightest fear. Yuan Longji's complexion became even more unsightly as he said, I already said that this matter still needs to be investigated. The prize was canceled because your behavior was too extreme and your self-defense was excessive. If there is a reason for this, you should know your limits. Don't tell me that you should be allowed to kill people. Li Daochong sneered. When someone identified me just now, why didn't anyone say that there was a need to investigate? I had no choice but to defend myself excessively. If they didn't force me, would I have attacked them? Why did they cancel what should have been mine? Yuan Longji didn't expect that Li Daochong would have the guts to question him in front of so many people. His old face suddenly turned ashen, and he wished he could chop Li Daochong into pieces. However, when Yuan Longji sensed the aura emitted from Chu Qinyue's body, he immediately suppressed the thought of chopping Li Daochong into pieces. Chu Qinyue was the only Foundation establishment lecturer on Blue Bay Star. Whether it was fame or strength, she was extraordinary. Yuan Longji didn't want to have a conflict with Chu Qinyue. Behind her stood Qian Changhai. That old man didn't look serious on the surface, but after all, he had been glorious in the past. Yuan Longji couldn't guess how strong Qian Changhai was. This old guy had been working at Xiansong University for more than 100 years and had always been the vice dean of the Cultivation Academy. His qualifications were much older than Yuan Longji's. It was said that Qian Changhai had the cultivation of Jin Dan stage, but no one had ever seen Qian Changhai fight with anyone. In the school, this old guy who was not serious did nothing other than watching movies. For more than 100 years, the only thing he did was to bring Chu Qinyue back to Xiansong University from who knows where. If the two of them weren't standing behind Li Daochong, Yuan Longji would have already used his pressure to cause internal injuries to Li Daochong. Principal Yuan, in my opinion, it is indeed inappropriate to cancel Student Li's prize. The prize should be given to him, an elder in the VIP seat said. The elder and Yuan Longji glanced at each other. The latter immediately understood the elder's meaning. The elder's meaning was very simple. Take the money to avoid trouble. Li Daochong was so agitated right now, most likely because of the cancellation of the generous prize, which made him angry out of shame. As long as the prize was given to him, he shouldn't make a fuss. I wonder if any of the lecturers have any objections to Elder Yuan's suggestion. Yuan Longji asked for their opinions. The lecturers looked at each other. The extra prize was originally a spontaneous decision made by the three principals. What was the point of asking them? Naturally, no one responded. If no one objects, then no objection. In that case, Li Daochong, you can take the prize. After saying this, Yuan Longji took out the 3 items and handed them over. Li Daochong naturally didn't refuse. He took the items and put them into his storage bag. Almost at the same time, Yuan Longji calmly transmitted a message to him. Li Daochong, you've already taken the prize and won first place. When you return to Blue Bay Star, there will be many cultivation companies looking for you to sign contracts with. At that time, you'll be free to choose. Your cultivation path will be bright in the future. As for your grudge with those brats, put it aside for the time being. When you return to Blue Bay Star, you can go to the Security Bureau and report the case. Yuan Longji used telekinesis to transmit his message. Apart from Li Daochong, no one else could hear it. This kind of transmission was extremely covert and couldn't be recorded or detected. With the heavy silver essence crystal, 9 split saber art, and foundation establishment elixir in hand, Li Daochong's mood improved slightly. However, there was no way he would let those brats go. Yuan Longji said it lightly. If Li Daochong really returned to Blue Bay Star, he was afraid that he would have to face the wrath of more than a dozen families. On the surface, they might be afraid of the Security Bureau, but it was unknown what kind of tricks they were playing behind the scenes. With the strength of these families, if they wanted to trip Li Daochong up, it would be enough to make Li Daochong suffer. Li Daochong had to make a big deal out of this matter, no matter what. Those who had nothing to lose were not afraid of those who wore shoes. Since he was going to die anyway, he might as well fight to the death. Principal Yuan, since you don't want to report the case in the name of the school, I'll have to do it myself, Li Daochong said with a calm face. Yuan Longji couldn't believe his ears. This Li Daochong actually ignored his advice and insisted on going against him. He had already taken the 3 super prizes, but he still didn't give up. This was a challenge to his status, and even a provocation. It was a slap to his face as the principal. Yuan Longji sent another telepathic message over. Li Daochong, have you had enough? You're still young and have a great future. Don't destroy your future because of a moment of loyalty. I'm helping you by telling you not to pursue the case. Li Daochong's face changed slightly. He knew that Yuan Longji was most likely afraid of the family forces behind the dozen playboys. However, as the principal of the school, he bowed his head to the influential people. It was really unworthy of his reputation. It was no wonder that after so many years, he had reached the foundation establishment stage at the age of 30 and broke through to the Jean Dan stage at the age of 80. After the breakthrough, he had stagnated at the early stage of Jean Dan stage. Li Daochong thought about it and decided to give Yuan Longji some face. He also transmitted a message using telekinesis. Principal Yuan, if you really want to help me, punish those playboys according to the rules of the mysterious firmament school. If you don't want to, then I'll have to solve it myself. Huh? Yuan Longji's expression showed a trace of surprise. He looked at Li Daochong with a bit of doubt. Qi refining stage can also use telekinesis? Yuan Longji felt a chill run down his spine. A dignified Jean Dan stage cultivator was actually frightened by a Qi refining stage cultivator. Yuan Longji was really shocked. Telekinesis can only be used after reaching the middle stage of Qi gathering stage. Otherwise, there is no way to use telekinesis. Li Tianyang? Hiss. Yuan Longji couldn't help but inwardly suck in a breath of cold air. Suddenly, he seemed to see Li Tianyang's domineering figure appear behind Li Daocheng. Li Tianyang was once the #1 expert of Blue Bay Star. Even Yuan Longji, a veteran Jin Dan stage cultivator, had a deep fear and dread in his heart. Could it be that Li Tianyang was not seriously injured like the rumors said? Was he just pretending? The corner of Yuan Longji's eyes twitched. If Li Tianyang was really pretending to be seriously injured, then his strength in Blue Bay Star could crush everything. Besides Li Tianyang, Yuan Longji couldn't imagine who could make Li Daocheng become so powerful in such a short time. He even knew how to use telekinesis. Li Daocheng's calmness made Yuan Longji speculate. If he only relied on Chu Qianyue and Qian Changhai, he wouldn't be so confident. Chu Qianyue had already submitted her resignation. After the end of the beta test, she would no longer be a special class lecturer in Xiansong University. It was said that she would leave Blue Bay Star to deal with some personal matters. Chu Qianyue could protect Li Daocheng, but she couldn't protect him forever. Even if Chu Qianyue didn't leave, her strength wasn't enough to shake the encirclement of more than a dozen families. Although Qian Changhai was very mysterious, there was a reason why he ended up in this situation. It was said that he offended the Federation's higher-ups and had to live in seclusion. Even if he wanted to support Li Daocheng, he didn't dare to make too big of a commotion. Otherwise, it would be disadvantageous to himself. However, Li Tianyang was different. Whether it was strength or temperament, he was a powerful figure. Li Daocheng was his son. As long as he still had a breath, it was impossible for him to leave his son alone. At this time, Li Daocheng was somewhat unfathomable in Yuan Longji's eyes. You do as you see fit. This matter is beyond the scope of what the school can manage. Yuan Longji weighed again and said something that he wouldn't offend anyone. The complexions of more than a dozen family elders in the VIP seats suddenly changed. They all looked at Li Daocheng. Some of them even attacked Li Daocheng. However, Li Daocheng, who had a strong telekinesis, wasn't afraid. These elders were only at the Qi gathering stage. Their power wasn't enough to make Li Daocheng feel uncomfortable. Of course, Chu Qianyue also helped Li Daocheng resist a large part of the power. The cold expression on her beautiful face became even colder. Since the school can't do anything about it, I can only report it to the police. Li Daocheng said as he raised his wristwatch and dialed the spiritual network number of the Cultivation Security Bureau. The call was quickly connected. Li Daocheng didn't hide anything and directly turned up the volume to the maximum. A solemn but gentle female voice came from the other end. Li Daocheng immediately explained the matter and told Li Daocheng where he was. The police station told him to wait for half an hour. The Cultivation Security Bureau's patrol shuttle would arrive as soon as possible. When Li Daocheng turned off his wristwatch, the Flying Sky Hall was dead silent. The headhunters of the cultivation companies looked at each other in dismay and removed Li Daocheng's name from the observation list. Many cultivation companies were inextricably linked to these families. Li Daocheng had offended so many families. If they recruited Li Daocheng into the company, it would only cause trouble for the company. If Li Daocheng's talent was really heaven-defying, he would definitely reach the foundation establishment stage in the future. If he couldn't reach the foundation establishment stage, then the gains wouldn't make up for the losses of offending so many families for a cultivator at the Qi gathering stage. The probability of reaching the foundation establishment stage was small, and the probability of replacing a spirit vein was even smaller. After weighing the pros and cons, it was only natural that the headhunters would choose to stand on the side of these families. Of course, the 7 major cultivation companies weren't afraid of a mere dozen families on a 4th-class cultivation planet. It wasn't a big deal even if they joined forces. However, the 7 major cultivation companies didn't attach much importance to Blue Bay Star. The recruiters they sent were all small clerks who had been stationed on Blue Bay Star for a long time. These guys usually received a lot of benefits from these families. Some of the recruiters would even secretly sell some insignificant positions in the company. The dozens of VIPs who had been invited to observe the situation all had ugly expressions on their faces. They felt that Li Daocheng was taking it too seriously. The Li family's chief steward, Li Qianxing, had watched the entire process, but he hadn't said a word from beginning to end. The shock on Li Qianxing's face gradually eased after Li Daocheng reported the case, and he inadvertently revealed a faint smile. Li Daocheng had offended so many people at once. This was exactly what he wanted to see. After Li Daocheng won first place, Li Qianxing had been worrying about how difficult it would be to deal with Li Tianyang and his father in the future. He hadn't expected that this kid would actually dig a hole for himself. This was for the best. It would save the Li family the trouble of scheming. Everyone had their own little plans, and half an hour passed quickly in silence. A pure black small shuttle more than 20 meters long and 7 meters wide flew into the Skysoar Hall from beyond the starry sky. Two cultivators wearing the Cultivation Security Bureau's special service uniform stepped out of the shuttle. Both of them were at the middle stage of the Qi condensation realm. Chapter 91. The Federation Cultivation Security Bureau represented the government of the Federation. The two Secret Service agents didn't have high cultivation, but their appearance immediately shocked everyone present. The principals of the three schools were Jin Dan cultivators, but they didn't dare to say anything. The Secret Service agents went about their official business. They collected evidence, investigated, and inquired. Then, they copied Wang Guanglei's spirit vision image for the record. The whole process was fast but very strict. The Secret Service agents didn't say anything unnecessary. After they were done, they told Li Daocheng and his group of rich kids to report to the Tianyuan City Security Bureau within 3 days after returning to Blue Bay Star. Then, they drove the patrolling shuttle out of the Ghost Hunting Star's Flying Heaven Hall. After the Secret Service agents left, Yuan Longji announced the end of the beta test and returned to Blue Bay Star. The students of the three schools returned to their respective shuttles. The students with serious injuries continued to recuperate in the Flying Heaven Hall. After they recovered, they would be transferred to Blue Bay Star for recovery treatment. The end of the semester beta test was officially over. After returning, more than 10 families secretly made connections. On Xiansong University's shuttle, the atmosphere was very strange. A headhunter secretly found Li Daocheng, hoping that he would consider joining their company, but not publicly for the time being. Li Daocheng naturally didn't agree. He didn't plan to join any cultivation company yet. After all, his official cultivation career had just begun, and only a year had passed in university. After Chu Qianyue and Qian Changhai boarded the shuttle, they met Li Daocheng. Chu Qianyue came to say goodbye, but her attitude was still cold. However, she expressed her support for Li Daocheng. She also told Li Daocheng that before this matter was settled, she wouldn't leave Blue Bay Star, but she wouldn't stay at Xiansong University. After sending off his two teachers, Li Daocheng wanted to rest for a while, but who knew that people would come in an endless stream. Xiao Sinuo, Hua Xiaoling, and Ouyang Qian came together to congratulate him. Li Daocheng's room was never free. People kept coming to visit. Half a day later, no one came again. Li Daocheng had been meditating for half a day when the flying space shuttle finally arrived at Blue Bay Star. The first thing Li Daocheng did after disembarking from the shuttle was to head home with Li Qingyao. After getting first place in the beta test, Li Daocheng had no choice but to leave through the back door of the shuttle with Li Qingyao. Back at the old house, Li Tianyang had already prepared a table full of dishes to welcome his son back. Li Qingyao had already informed Li Daocheng of Li Tianyang's success a day ago. When Li Tianyang found out, he was overjoyed. He was even more excited than when he broke through to the Jin dance stage. Although he knew that his son was different from the past, he would never have dreamed that Li Daocheng would be able to get first place. Li Tianyang was very familiar with the children of the big families on Blue Bay Star. Gu Chao and O Kikin were very talented. They could be said to be invincible among the young people on Blue Bay Star. Li Daocheng was able to beat the two of them. Whether it was luck or tactics, It meant that his son was no longer the silly young master he used to be. In fact, after returning, Li Tianyong didn't ask Li Daochong too much. He knew that his son must have had a fortuitous encounter. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to change so much. Li Daochong's temperament and words were different from before. However, Li Tianyong respected his son's wishes. If he didn't say anything, he wouldn't ask. On the path of cultivation, who didn't have one or two secrets? Li Tianyong himself also had a fortuitous encounter that no one knew about. Li Tianyong was very open-minded about this. Therefore, he never took the initiative to ask Li Daochong why he had changed so much. As long as his son was happy, it was fine. At night, the family of three sat at the dining table in the living room and drank to their heart's content to celebrate Li Daochong getting first place in the beta test. Li Qingyao also drank for the first time. Usually, this little girl didn't drink at all. After a few glasses of wine, she told Li Tianyong everything that had happened on the Ghost Hunter planet. After Li Tianyong heard this, he slammed the table and said, "Son, you should kill that bastard Zhan Honglai. If the sky falls, I'll help you hold it up. Even if my cultivation level has dropped, I can still deal with the Mir Zhan family. Over the years, I still have many friends who owe me favors. Some of them have even gone through life and death with me. As long as I say the word, they could destroy the Zhan family at any time." Li Daochong saw Li Tianyong's agitated look and felt a warmth in his heart. He said, "Dad, the Zhan family doesn't need you to do anything. I can deal with such a despicable family. Son, don't worry about the security bureau. I'll contact a comrade of mine and get him to help you." Li Tianyong's eyes revealed a murderous glint. Whoever dared to touch his son would be risking their lives. "Dad, there's no need. You just need to focus all your attention on recovering your cultivation. Don't be distracted." Li Daochong knew his father's personality very well and advised him. "Humph, these guys must have eaten a bear's heart and a leopard's gall. Back then, when they saw me, they were like watchdogs." Li Tianyong became more and more agitated as he spoke. Coupled with the fact that he was drinking, he couldn't control himself. "Dad, brother, things are different now. The Zhan family can't touch him for the time being." After getting first place in the beta test, even the Federation government will pay more attention to brother. "The Zhan family won't dare to touch brother openly," Li Qingyao said. "They probably won't dare. However, since Zhan Jintian didn't care about the past and made a move on Little Chong, it's too late for the Zhan family to stop now." Li Tianyong's face was gloomy. Li Daochong saw that Li Tianyong was furious and looked like he was about to go to the Zhan family to kill them. He hurriedly said, "Dad, you don't have to worry about this. I'll handle it myself. If you insist on interfering, I won't live at home anymore." When Li Tianyong heard this, his expression relaxed and his anger dissipated. As a father, he wasn't afraid of anything but his son. "Little Chong, Dad knows that you don't want to make a big deal out of this. However, the way the Zhan family treated you really makes me angry." Li Tianyong said helplessly, "It's okay, Dad. I'll deal with them. However, it won't be a head-on confrontation. What we need now is to recuperate. You should recover to the Gene Dance stage as soon as possible. Only when you're fully recovered will we have the greatest guarantee." Li Daochong continued. As he spoke, Li Daochong used his telekinesis, and a bottle of Foundation Establishment elixir appeared in his hand. He handed it to Li Tianyong and said, "Dad, this bottle of Foundation Establishment elixir is for you." Li Tianyong was an unyielding man. When he saw his son give him the Foundation Establishment elixir without any hesitation, his lower lip trembled and a warm current passed through his heart. He even felt a little sour. "Son, I don't need it. You can keep it for yourself. And at most 3 years, I will definitely be able to rebuild my foundation." "Dad, you can't wait for 3 years. The Zhan family may not be a threat, but sooner or later, your enemies will come looking for you. There's also the Gu family. The grudge between you and the Gu family won't just end like this. This bottle of Foundation Establishment elixir is most suitable for you. I'm still young and have plenty of time. Maybe in the future, there will be even better elixirs waiting for me." Li Daochong saw Li Tianyong didn't want to take it and persuaded him. "Dad, this is big brother's kind intentions. You should accept it, Li Qingyao said. Li Tianyang still didn't want to take it. As a father, he had to rely on his son. He couldn't put down his old face. The Foundation Establishment elixir wasn't an ordinary item. There were very few of them on the market. When breaking through, drinking a bottle of high-purity Foundation Establishment elixir could increase the success rate of Foundation Establishment by 20%. This was a very amazing increase. Dad, if you don't want it, I'll throw it away, Li Daochong said and got up to leave. Chapter 92. Giving the Foundation Establishment elixir to Li Tianyang was something that Li Daochong had thought of after winning the prize. Making the best use of everything, Li Daochong could keep the Foundation Establishment elixir for himself, but that was a matter for the future. If he couldn't make use of it, then no matter how good it was just a decoration. Thus, giving the Foundation Establishment elixir to Li Tianyang would be the best way to make use of it. After more than a month of recuperation, Li Tianyang's spirit root had more or less recovered, and the cracked spirit-building placenta had also gradually healed. Li Tianyang's cultivation had already recovered to the late stage of qi condensation, not far from the peak stage, and Foundation Establishment was in sight. If he cultivated slowly, his progress would be much slower, but with the Foundation Establishment elixir, he would be able to reach Foundation Establishment in at most half a year. Li Daochong had thought that even if he had the hot blood upgrader and cultivated quickly, it would be impossible for him to be faster than his father after his injuries were healed. After all, he was originally a Jin Dan cultivator. Li Tianyang's foundation was solid, but his Jin Dan was broken, and his spirit-building placenta was still there, so he was only recovering now, not cultivating. The speed of recovery was much faster than cultivating, and with the Foundation Establishment elixir, the recovery time would be further reduced. It was reasonable to give the Foundation Establishment elixir to his father. Li Daochong had gained a new understanding of the hot blood upgrader while hunting dark ghosts on the ghost hunting planet. After leveling up, the soul power of low-level dark ghosts was too weak to be converted into spirit qi. Simply put, there was no experience to be gained. Li Daochong's current killing of dwarf dark ghosts didn't have much meaning to him. Even if he didn't convert them into spirit qi and instead accumulated them into spirit qi, it wasn't much. Killing a bound spirit only gave him 5 spirit qi. It was pitifully little, and he might as well kill stonehorn cows. The soul power of a dark ghost was extremely limited, while the soul power of a ghost beast was slightly higher. In short, as Li Daochong's cultivation increased, he had to kill higher-level dark ghosts to obtain enough spirit qi. For Li Daochong, dwarf ghosts were no longer meaningful, and the conversion rate of low imps was also decreasing. Only high-level imps would be able to completely transform their soul power. This imperceptibly increased the difficulty for Li Daochong to level up, because the amount of spiritual energy required would increase exponentially. If Li Daochong hadn't been lucky enough to run into 2 green-faced fanged ghosts who didn't know what was good for them, he wouldn't have been able to advance from the 8th layer to the 9th layer of qi refining. Otherwise, Li Daochong might not have reached the 9th level of qi refinement by the end of the test. If Li Daochong hadn't reached the 9th level of qi refining, the outcome of the battle against Zhan Honglai would still be uncertain. As for the battle against Orson, Li Daochong would have definitely been the one to be crushed. The hot-blooded upgrader was not omnipotent. Of course, without the hot-blooded upgrader, there would be no Li Daochong today. Li Daochong wasn't sure how to proceed with his cultivation. If he wanted to increase his cultivation, devouring dark ghosts was the best way. Normally, Li Daochong could cultivate on his own, but the effects were minimal. After 2 months of special training with Chu Qianhua, if it was a student with a profound heaven spirit vein, their strength and cultivation would be increased by a level. However, other than the fact that Li Daochong's physique, spatial perception, and martial arts had improved greatly, there was basically no change in his cultivation base and strength. In other words, if Li Daochong wanted to increase his cultivation, he could only rely on the hot-blooded upgrader. Cultivation methods and secret manuals were useless to him. From this, It could be seen that the hot-blooded upgrader did not increase Li Daocheng's talent. It only gave him another cultivation method. Fortunately, after his cultivation increased, it would nourish his physique. After his physique strengthened, it would consolidate his cultivation. The two complemented each other naturally. Whether his talent was good or not was not important to Li Daocheng. Under the nourishment of the spirit qi, Li Daocheng's 9 ordinary spirit veins were all opened, and they were much thicker than the spirit veins of ordinary cultivators. Although he did not have the 5-element spirit vein or the profound heaven spirit vein, his spirit veins were 3 times thicker than ordinary spirit veins. The spirit veins were the foundation of cultivation. In the future, if he wanted to build his foundation, he must first cultivate the spirit veins into a spirit root. The 9 spirit veins were connected in a complicated way and extended throughout the body. The 9 spirit veins would form a thick spirit core, which was the spirit root. After the spirit root formed, the spirit-building placenta would be born. Once it formed, he would be in the foundation building stage. However, foundation building was still a bit far away for Li Daocheng. No matter how talented a person was, the fastest time in the history of the Shenghua Federation to reach foundation building from awakening their spirit veins was 5 years. The battle sword Augustine took 7.5 years, but this was already the fastest record on the Indigo Bay star, which was shocking. Foundation building was definitely not an easy task. There were hundreds of millions of cultivators today, but less than 1 in 10,000 of them eventually reached foundation building. One could imagine how difficult it was. Li Daocheng did not think that he could sit back and relax, just because he had the hot-blooded upgrader. Even if a pie fell from the sky, you still had to catch it. After resting at home for a day, Li Daocheng reported to the Tianyuan City Cultivation Safety Bureau. The person who received Li Daocheng was a petite female clerk. She greeted him with a smile the entire time, which made Li Daocheng very uncomfortable. Li Daocheng finally proposed to sue the Federation Cultivation Court, but the female clerk told him that it would be more troublesome to sue and would take a long time. Moreover, more than 10 students from the defendant's side had already come. Their attitude was very good, and they were willing to compensate for all the losses. Due to the special location of the incident, which was not a normal environment, but the Ghost Hunter Star Banished area, where the competition for the end-of-term exam was taking place, the other party insisted that they had joined forces to deal with Li Daocheng in order to snatch his points. As a result, the nature of the entire incident became very different. It could be said that it did not violate the Federation's cultivation laws, so kidnapping and intentional murder of a cultivator were not established. The female clerk was beautiful and had a good figure. She would intentionally or unintentionally lean against Li Daocheng during their conversation. Li Daocheng couldn't say that he didn't feel anything at all under these vague circumstances, but he felt a little strange. The Tianyuan City Cultivation Safety Bureau had a very high status on Blue Bay Star. It was equivalent to the highest local law enforcement department. It had a lot of power. Even if it was just a clerk in the safety bureau, it still had a very high status. There was no need for this female clerk to be so attentive to a nobody like him. "Mr. Li, let's have lunch together," the female clerk said after looking at the time. "No, I still have things to do. Since there's no way to sue, I'll pay the compensation." Li Daocheng refused. "The compensation has been prepared. As long as Mr. Li signs the settlement agreement, the compensation will be immediately transferred to Mr. Li's spiritual internet account." The female clerk replied with a somewhat disappointed expression when she saw that Li Daocheng was unwilling. "Oh, then how much is the total compensation?" Li Daocheng was a little curious. "A total of 1 million Federation dollars," the female clerk replied. Li Daocheng's eyes flickered. He didn't expect it to be so much. However, on second thought, with more than a dozen families sharing the compensation, each family would only pay tens of thousands of Federation dollars. It was nothing to them. If they could solve the problem by spending this little money, why not? However, 1 million was not a small number for Li Daocheng. After pondering for a moment, Li Daocheng said, "Okay, where's the settlement agreement? I'll sign it now." Li Daocheng had long known that there would be no conclusion to this matter. It was already good enough to get a sum of compensation. It was obvious that the families didn't want to spend too much time on this matter. Otherwise, even if they didn't pay the compensation, there would be nothing they could do if they insisted that they wanted to steal Li Daocheng's points. The female clerk then took out a piece of silver paper with a faint halo flowing on it. This kind of document was the Security Bureau's special paper for handling cases and was very difficult to destroy. Li Daocheng read the contents of the document. It was nothing more than a disclaimer and nonsense about how the two sides reached a settlement. In the end, it was the explanation of the compensation of 1 million Federation dollars. After reading it, Li Daocheng pressed his thumbprint on the document. The female clerk then took out a spirit card and handed it to Li Daocheng. Mr. Li, you only need to swipe your wristwatch, and the money on this card will be transferred to your account. Other than you, no one else can use this card. Li Daocheng took the spirit card and immediately swiped it on his wristwatch. 1 million Federation dollars was transferred to his account immediately. Li Daocheng inadvertently smiled. With this money, his father's recovery speed would be further improved. Li Daocheng was looking forward to seeing how the Li family would react when his father's cultivation recovered to the peak of the Foundation establishment stage. He also wanted to see how the major forces of Blue Bay Star would react. Of course, in addition to helping his father recover, Li Daocheng would not neglect his own cultivation. Li Daocheng was about to leave after taking the money, but the female clerk secretly held Li Daocheng's hand and said, "Mr. Li, my name is Yang Xian. In the future, if you have anything you don't understand about cultivation, you can ask me." Finally, congratulations to Mr. Li for winning first place in the end-of-term test of the 3 Blue Bay Star schools. When Li Daocheng heard Yang Xian's words, he finally understood why she was so attentive to him. Most likely, she was optimistic about his future and wanted to leave a good impression on him. "Miss Yang, I will definitely ask for your help in the future," Li Daocheng replied simply. He inadvertently pulled his hand out of Yang Xian's hand and got up to leave. After leaving the Security Bureau, Li Daocheng used the Spirit Void flying steps and was dozens of meters away in the blink of an eye. This move made Yang Xian, who was looking at Li Daocheng through the window, look shocked. The first place of the test was indeed worthy of being the first place of the test. Yang Xian, a small clerk, was able to work in the Security Bureau. Her cultivation level was only at the 8th level of Qi refinement. Her father's generation had some connections, but her cultivation level was too low. She could only be a clerk. Otherwise, she could at least be a female cultivator, special police officer in a local street office. However, Yang Xian was still unwilling to just be a clerk. She was more active and would not miss out on anyone with a bright future as long as she met them. Even if she could not form a relationship with them, she wanted to leave a good impression. After finishing his business, Li Daocheng returned to the old house and immediately took out the 9-split saber technique and began to study it. The 9-split saber technique was divided into 5 levels. It was a mid-grade Earth-level cultivation method. In a small place like the Blue Bay Star, an Earth-level cultivation method was definitely considered a superior cultivation method. Li Daocheng had just opened the cultivation method and flipped through a few pages when his mental power contracted and a chill spread from his back. Whoosh! A sharp arrow pierced through the door and whistled. Chapter 93. The silver arrow penetrated the wall of the courtyard, penetrated Li Daocheng's bedroom door, and shot towards him. Li Daocheng moved in a flash and grabbed the arrow. Poochie, but he couldn't catch it. It penetrated his fist, and the flesh of his palm cracked. With a bang, it shot into Li Daocheng's left shoulder. Penetrated. Gurgling, blood spurted out from the bloody hole in the shoulder. Li Daocheng's face was dignified. Regardless of the injury, the whole person jumped forward and rolled on the ground. If it weren't for Li Daocheng's sharp mind power, far stronger than the cultivators of the same level, and always vigilant, he would have sensed the danger at the moment the arrow was shot and reacted quickly, narrowly avoiding the fatal injury. Otherwise, this arrow would have directly penetrated Li Daocheng's heart instantly killing him. The person who shot this arrow, the cultivation level of the person was far above Li Daocheng, at least a cultivator of the qi gathering stage. The penetrating power of the arrow was far beyond imagination. Li Daocheng sensed that the other party was at least 1 kilometer away from him. It was a sniper, and his mind power was very strong. He was in a closed room, but the other party could accurately know his position, aim at the vital part, and launch a thunderous attack. It could be seen that the other party was not only strong, but also a veteran. Just as Li Daocheng lay down, 2 more silver lights penetrated the alloy door and came whistling, penetrating the wall. Li Daocheng converged all the aura in his body and covered it with his mind power. After 3 arrows, there was no movement outside. Li Daocheng was worried that the arrow was poisoned, but after circulating his qi, there was nothing wrong, and his heart was slightly relieved. As long as there was no poison, this injury was nothing, and he still had the power to fight. Li Daocheng lay on the ground, tore open his clothes, quickly bandaged his shoulder, took out the Zamadeo, and held it in his hand. The basic cultivation method quickly practiced in his mind, and the most essential attack move, the Thunder Strike, was ready to be used. Li Daocheng waited quietly. The other party shot 3 arrows in a row, and his aura disappeared immediately. The other party must have thought that he was killed by the arrows. However, there was no certainty in everything just by feeling. Seeing was believing. Since the other party was a veteran, he would definitely lurk to see if he could kill the target. Li Daocheng held his breath and spread his mind power slightly, covering the area within 20 meters of his bedroom. Today, Li Tiong and Li Qingyao went to the Li family to retrieve Xia Yun's memorial tablet. Li Daocheng originally also wanted to go, but because he had to report to the Cultivation Security Bureau, he didn't go. Not only did the Li family revoke Li Tianyang's position as the head of the family, but they also demoted him to a servant. The reason was that he neglected his duties. As the head of the family, he didn't put the family's interests above all else. He flaunted his bravery and made a huge mistake. Although he had already made up for his mistakes, he was still stripped of his military position and was forced to retire from the army. The Li family's reasons seemed unreasonable, but it was also reasonable. After being demoted to a servant, Li Tianyang's dual cultivation partner, Xia Yun's memorial tablet, could no longer be placed in the Li family's ancestral hall. It had to be moved out and placed in the public ancestral hall. Li Tianyang naturally didn't allow this, and wanted to move his wife's memorial tablet to his own residence. Li Tianyang hadn't left the old house since he returned. He had been recuperating, and today was the first time he went out. Li Daocheng had just returned home, and an assassin had appeared. This kind of thing couldn't be explained by coincidence. Li Daocheng, who was lying on the ground, smiled slightly. He didn't know why, but at this moment, he wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he was a little excited. The spiritual energy in his body was restless. A few minutes passed, but there was no abnormal movement outside the house. Li Daocheng's mind power didn't sense any fluctuations. Li Daocheng was a little puzzled. Did the other party leave after shooting 3 arrows? Li Daocheng was still lying on the ground, motionless. His eyes were fixed on the door, and his whole body was tense, ready to launch a thunderous attack at any time. Li Daocheng still had 2 talismans in his hand, ready to be used at any time. These 2 talismans were the highest achievements Li Daocheng had made in the past month. 2 strengthened level 3 ice talismans, whose power could reach the level of an ordinary level 4 ice talisman. They were originally Li Daocheng's trump card on the ghost hunting planet, but after he successfully advanced to the 9th tier of the Qi refining realm, there was no need to use them. A few more minutes passed, but there was still no movement. Li Daocheng's brows showed a trace of doubt. At this moment, an extremely slight fluctuation came from his mind power. If Li Daocheng hadn't been paying full attention, he would have thought this fluctuation was just a small bug flying outside the house. But now, this slight fluctuation made every pore on Li Daocheng's body stand on end. It wasn't fear but excitement. In the face of a powerful opponent, the excitement of wanting to give the other party a surprise. It was like hiding in a place where no one could find you and playing hide-and-seek, but your heart was surging with excitement, and you couldn't hold it in. Your whole body was trembling slightly, and your heart was beating faster. Of course, Li Daochong wasn't blind. If it weren't for the two strengthened level 3 ice talismans in his hand, he would have slipped away from the back door. After the slight fluctuation disappeared, a shadow flashed across the gap under the door. After a while, it calmed down and the door lock moved silently. Click, the door was opened. Creak, the door opened, but there was no one. A few seconds later, a head flashed and shrank back. But when it saw a person lying on the ground, it stretched out again. Then, a short figure in ordinary Taoist robes flashed in. Almost at the same time, Li Daochong had already cast an ice talisman in his hand. The best time was the moment the other party appeared. The best time to launch a sneak attack was to catch the other party off guard. If he missed it, there wouldn't be a second chance. Li Daochong had already made all the preparations. He had been waiting for this moment, but he couldn't tell the other party's cultivation level. But he was sure that the other party wasn't at the foundation establishment stage or the peak of the Qi gathering stage, because the other party hadn't completely concealed his aura and whereabouts in front of him. In fact, after that arrow, Li Daochong had a rough idea of the other party's cultivation level. It should be between the early stage and mid-stage of the Qi gathering. After being hit by the arrow, Li Daochong instantly spread out his telekinesis and searched the surrounding 300 meters. There was no one else. After the Federation's cultivation method was introduced, the assassin industry had gradually declined. Murder was illegal, and killing a cultivator was an additional crime. The Cultivation Security Bureau wasn't to be trifled with. If caught killing a cultivator, they would be severely punished. After being convicted, they would be directly teleported to 13 Spectre at the border of the Hades and left to fend for themselves. 13 Spectre was the border planet where dark ghosts entered the Federation. Dark ghosts wreaked havoc and ghosts were everywhere. Once they reached the Nether Devil Star, they would enter the gates of hell. There, dying was much easier than living. The price to pay for killing an innocent cultivator was unbearable. Even desperados had to weigh the pros and cons. Therefore, in this era, there weren't many people who dared to be assassins. No one would take the risk unless they had nowhere else to go. Hiring an assassin was extremely expensive. Apart from the issue of price, hiring too many assassins would also make the employer unsafe. After confirming that the other party was only one person, and that it was a sniper, Li Daochong decided to ambush the other party. Although it was still a little risky, Li Daochong had his own confidence. In addition to the 2 ice talismans, he also had a level 3 strengthened golden bell talisman and a level 3 fire talisman. In addition, Li Daochong's own strength was close to that of an ordinary cultivator at the peak of the Qi gathering stage. Li Daochong could still fight a sniper at close range in the early stage of the Qi gathering. If he was dealing with a close-range cultivator, he would probably have to run away. The ice talisman was as fast as lightning. The distance of a few meters was negligible. Li was already very careful. When he was close to the target, he kept his telekinesis locked onto the other party. After repeatedly confirming that there was no aura, he lurked and intentionally waited for a while. He also used a secret technique to open the door. Only when he saw the corpse lying on the ground did he let his guard down. However, as soon as he entered the room, the corpse lying on the ground suddenly swung its arm. With a boom, a blast of cold air blasted toward him. Luya's reaction was extremely fast, but he was still hit by the ice talisman. His body immediately stiffened. Li Daochong leaped up like a cheetah. He gripped his Zamadeo tightly with both hands and fiercely slashed at the attacker. He used all his strength to launch a thunderous attack. In the world of martial arts, only speed was unbeatable. The ultimate essence of a basic technique was to use the most tricky and logical angle to launch the fastest attack. Whoosh! At the same time that Luya's body stiffened, a silver light flashed and the blade pierced through the air. The spirit energy in Lu Ya's body exploded. He ignored the internal injuries and raised the crossbow in his hand to block. Clang! A crisp sound rang out. Lu Ya flew backward and crashed into the wall with a loud thud. Li Daochong also flew backwards. Everything behind him was smashed into pieces. His back hit the wall. The qi and blood in his body churned, and a mouthful of blood rushed to his throat. Is this the strength of a qi-gathering cultivator? Li Daochong was shocked. The opponent was hit by the ice talisman, and frost had already formed all over his body. Unexpectedly, he did not lose the ability to move and blocked his full strength attack, causing him to suffer internal injuries. Li only felt dizzy. He had already suffered internal injuries. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He was complaining in his heart. Is this a freaking qi-gathering cultivator? How is this possible? Not only did his sniping miss, but the opponent was also able to completely hide his breath and not expose it at all. He had been pretending to be dead, waiting for him to take the bait. Not to mention that he had a level 4 ice talisman in his hand. Even if he had not been ambushed, it would have been very difficult for him to block that attack. He was deceived by his employer. The moment Lu Ya fell to the ground, he ignored his internal injuries and raised the crossbow in his hand to shoot. But before he could shoot, another ice talisman shot out and froze the crossbow in his hand. What? Lu Ya was shocked. Before he could react, Li Daochong had already appeared in front of him. Puff! Li Daochong spat out a mouthful of blood and sprayed it on Lu Ya's face. His vision suddenly blurred. Lu Ya used his telekinesis to sense, tilted his head, and kicked out. Almost at the same time, the sound of the blade cutting into the bone was heard. Lu Ya felt a chill on his shoulder, followed by a sharp pain. Pung! Li Daochong was also sent flying by the kick. Clang! The Zamadeo in his hand flew out and smashed into the wall. Look at the talisman. Li Daochong shouted as he flew out. Lu Ya's heart was shocked. He desperately ran out of the door. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Only a few drops of blood were left on the ground. Li Daochong fell to the corner of the wall. His whole body was broken. Seeing that his opponent had escaped, he breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, he did not have any strength left. Only now did Li Daochong truly understand the strength of a qi-gathering cultivator. Li Daochong used his telekinesis to take out the golden bell talisman and the fire talisman. If his opponent came back, the two talismans in his hand would be his last struggle. Before Li Daochong could catch his breath, a sharp arrow pierced through the air with a swoosh. Fuck you, Li Daochong cursed in his heart. Chapter 94. Li Daochong took out two talismans at the same time. The fire talisman shot straight at the whistling arrow, while the golden bell talisman wrapped Li Daochong in a faint halo. Li Daochong's whole body fell apart, and he couldn't move. He could only watch the arrow penetrate the fire talisman and shoot toward him. The arrow was aimed at Li Daochong's glabella. Just when Li Daochong thought he was going to be killed, a beautiful figure shot toward him like lightning. Bang! A white jade hand appeared in front of Li Daochong, less than 10 centimeters away from the tip of his nose. The slender fingers firmly clamped the arrow. In Li Daochong's eyes, the arrow with infinite power was like paper. The two delicate jade fingers gently clamped it. With a crack, the front part of the arrow was broken into two pieces. Li Daochong looked at the owner of the jade hand and grinned. Blood gushed out of his mouth, and he murmured a few words. Thank you. Chu! His head tilted and he fainted. Chu Qinyue's cold face showed a hint of nervousness. She quickly grabbed Li Daochong's wrist and checked it. After confirming that there was no injury, her expression eased. Chu Qinyue took out a bottle of strong recovery liquid and poured it into Li Daochong's mouth. Then her figure flashed and disappeared. A few minutes later, Chu Qinyue reappeared in front of Li Daochong with a body in her hand. It was Lu Ya's. After the killer Lu Ya shot the arrow, he was swallowed by a powerful cold air and died instantly. His career as a killer was over. When Lu Ya contacted his employer, he never thought that assassinating a novice refinement stage cultivator would cost him his life. Chu Qianyue had been worried about Li Daochong since he had offended so many clans during the major examination. Some of the clans were very ruthless, and many people who had offended them ended up very miserable. Some of them even disappeared without a trace. On the surface, Chu Qianyue's attitude toward Li Daochong was cold. In fact, she had high expectations for him and wanted to leave something behind before she left. This time, it was hard to say whether she could come back. Even if everything went well, it would be many years later. Chu Qianyue was somewhat reluctant to leave this world, and it was more likely that she would never come back. Qian Shanghai had given her that thing. There were some things she had to do. Looking at the unconscious Li Daochong, Chu Qianyue sighed and reached out to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. "Brat, I'll help you one last time. You can only rely on yourself from now on." Li Daochong felt a warm current flowing through his body, making him feel very comfortable. He slowly opened his eyes, and what he saw was a peerlessly beautiful face. "Teacher Chu," Li Daochong called out subconsciously. Chu Qianyue didn't expect that Li Daochong would wake up so soon. She had just infused qi into his body to heal his injuries when he opened his eyes. Because they were very close to each other, Chu Qianyue's face turned red, and she almost suffered internal injuries. "Shut up, close your eyes, and cooperate with me," Chu Qianyue said coldly. "Oh," Li Daochong answered in confusion, and then closed his eyes. But at this moment his heart beat faster, and he felt a rush of excitement. Li Daochong had never seen Chu Qianyue at such a close distance. Her face was unbelievably exquisite. She was nothing more than a fairy. The only pity was that her face was always in a cold state and refused to let anyone get close to her. Half an hour later, Li Daochong's face became ruddy. His broken bones were quickly healed under the dual nourishment of the recovery elixir and spiritual qi. Chu Qianyue transferred a lot of spiritual qi to Li Daochong, giving him the greatest support. Li Daochong's previous state of collapse was completely gone. His bones were indescribably comfortable. Another 10 minutes passed. Chu Qianyue withdrew her jade-like hands from Li Daochong's chest. Her stunning face was dripping with fragrant sweat. Even though she had the cultivation of foundation establishment, she still felt a little tired after injecting qi into Li Daochong's body to heal him regardless of the cost. Li Daochong took a deep breath and was about to get up. But just as he stood up, his body froze. His shoulders instantly became numb, and then it spread all over his body. Plop! Falling to the ground, Li Daochong stared at the ceiling. He couldn't blink, couldn't breathe, and couldn't control his body. He seemed to be controlled by some mysterious force. His whole body was stiff, and he couldn't move. Huh! Li Daochong opened his mouth and tried to take a deep breath, but he couldn't do it. Chu Qianyue, who had just closed her eyes to adjust her breath, suddenly opened her eyes. She touched Li Daochong's forehead, pinched his arm, and finally felt his pulse. Chu Qianyue was shocked. She cried out in anger, "Guida castor grass, so vicious." Li Daochong's whole body didn't move, but his hearing was still there. Hearing Chu Qianyue's voice, he gasped. The liquid of Guida castor grass had a strong nerve and muscle paralysis effect. Without the Jindan realm, it was impossible to resist this paralysis effect. This liquid itself was not toxic, colorless, and tasteless. After entering the human body, it reacted with the blood and paralyzed the nerves and muscles. The incubation period was 1 hour. The paralysis effect itself didn't harm the body. It was just that the body couldn't move and the whole body's muscles would be in a stiff state. No matter how deep the poison was, it would disappear 1 hour after the attack. There were no side effects, but 1 hour of paralysis of the whole body's muscles and nerves was enough to kill a person. Could one live after an hour of cardiac arrest? Could one live without breathing for 10 minutes? Unless one reached the Jindan realm, one could use Jindan to provide energy to the body. Even if the heart stopped beating and couldn't breathe, one could survive for several days. But below the Jindan realm, as long as the blood was contaminated with the liquid of Guida castor grass, if there was no treatment, the person would undoubtedly die. Li Daochong was conscious at this time, but he couldn't feel his body. His heartbeat was getting slower and slower, and it was difficult for him to breathe. He could only exhale, but not inhale. Li Daocheng desperately ran the Reiki in his body, but he could only maintain it for a little while. His consciousness was becoming blurred little by little. Chu Qianyue's cold and beautiful face hesitated for a moment. She put one hand on Li Daocheng's heart and pressed down. At the same time, she lowered her head and opened her small mouth to kiss Li Daocheng's mouth. To be precise, it was not a kiss, but artificial respiration. Li Daocheng's eyes widened. Blinking was an impossible task for him. The concentration of the Guetuo castor grass in Li Daocheng's blood was very high. After it took effect, the paralysis effect was very fast. In just dozens of seconds, he lost all ability to move. If Li Daocheng didn't take measures to save him in time, he would die in a few minutes. The body of a refinement stage cultivator was still too weak. After all, it was still a mortal body. Eating, drinking, sleeping, and breathing were all essential. Chu Qianyue was in a hurry and didn't have a better way. The only thing she could think of was to breathe into Li Daocheng's mouth with her mouth and use her Reiki to squeeze his heart to make it beat. Li Daocheng never dreamed that one day he would be lying on his back on the ground, in a conscious state, being kissed by a peerless beauty using artificial respiration. His first kiss was gone just like that. Although Li Daocheng couldn't feel his lips at this time, such an intimate act still made his mind run wild. His heart, which was gradually stopping beating, seemed to have a slight reaction under this stimulation. But this was just Li Daocheng's illusion. In addition to his consciousness, the paralysis of his body was intensifying. Slap! After blowing several times, Chu Qianyue saw the strange look in Li Daocheng's eyes, and his face was slightly red in the paralysis state. She was a little annoyed and slapped Li Daocheng. "Brat, close your eyes." Li Daocheng complained in his heart. He wanted to close his eyes, but he had to be able to, Li Daocheng tried his best to make an innocent sound. Slap. Another slap on the face. Li Daocheng felt so wronged. Fortunately, he didn't feel any pain in the paralysis state. Of course, Chu Qianyue knew that Li Daocheng couldn't do anything now, including closing his eyes. Slapping Li Daocheng twice was just to cover up her shyness and annoyance. Chu Qianyue's beautiful face was already red. After slapping Li Daocheng twice, she wiped Li Daocheng's eyes with her glittering and translucent hands, and finally closed his eyes that made her feel so embarrassed. Chu Qianyue had been cultivating for more than 70 years since she was born, but she had never done such an intimate act with any man. She didn't know why she made such a bold move when she saw Li Daocheng's breathing was not smooth. Chu Qianyue was a little surprised that she was reluctant to let this brat go. Her desire to not let him die was very strong. Was it because he was very much like her? Or was it because of his performance in the special training and what he said to her? Chu Qianyue herself didn't understand why she was so nervous about this brat's life. She had been in the human world for decades. Except for Qian Changhai, Chu Qianyue didn't have any kind of affection for anyone. She only had a strange kind of friendship with Qian Changhai and a master-disciple relationship with him. But Li Daocheng gave Chu Qianyue a different feeling. This brat had only been in contact with her for 2 months, but Chu Qianyue felt a kind of intimacy that she had never felt before. Especially on the last day of the special training, the words that Li Daocheng said to her moved Chu Qianyue, who had no other thoughts in her mind. After Li Daocheng closed his eyes, he had no other feedback to the outside world except for his hearing and mind sense. Even if he knew that Chu Qianyue was giving him artificial respiration, he couldn't feel it. His consciousness gradually became sleepy in the paralysis. After a long time in a daze, Li Daocheng's body gradually regained consciousness. The first thing he felt was the warmth and softness on his lips. Li Daocheng subconsciously moved his lips. Slap! Then a slap came up and hit Li Daocheng's face. This time he felt it. It was burning. Li Daocheng opened his eyes. His eyes emitted an innocent light. He really didn't mean it. Humph, brat. How dare you take advantage of me? Chu Qianyue snorted and stood up from the ground. Li Daochong struggled to sit up and said apologetically, "Miss Chu, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." "Shut up. Don't say it again. Just pretend it never happened," Chu Qianyue said with a cold face. Then she waved her hand, and a flame flew out from her palm and fell on the killer not far away. In just a few seconds, the killer's body was burned to ashes. Nothing was left, not even black ashes. Genuine fire? Li Daochong was shocked. He knew that Chu Qianyue was very strong, but he didn't expect her to be strong enough to condense a genuine fire. Chapter 95. Li Daochong was shocked when Chu Qianyue burned the corpse with true fire. True fire was a pure yang object that could restrain all low-level dark ghosts. Someone wants to kill you. If you don't want to die, then cultivate as hard as you can. Only when your strength is strong enough can your enemies shrink back and not dare to provoke you. I can only help you this much. Tomorrow, I will leave Indigo Bay Star. After Chu Qianyue dealt with the corpse, the look on her beautiful face returned to the cold look of the past. "When will you come back?" Li Daochong struggled to stand up and asked while scratching his head. "I don't know," Chu Qianyue replied coldly. "Where are you going?" "I'll visit you when I'm free." Li Daochong asked. "It's useless to tell you. You can't go there. Don't ask anymore. If I can come back, I'll inform Old Man Qian in advance. If you're still in Blue Bay Star, he'll inform you. Take this manual and practice it well. Even if you can't build your foundation in the future, you'll be able to fight with a foundation-building cultivator if you master this manual." Chu Qianyue said as a yellow ancient book appeared in her hand. Although the secret manual was shabby, it gave people a sense of antiquity and weight. On the cover of the book, there were 4 big words, Taishu swordsmanship. Li Daochong took the secret manual, and his eyes lit up. This secret manual was actually a heaven-class manual, which was much more powerful than the 9-split saber technique that he had just obtained. "Brat, don't be happy too early. Don't practice it before you reach the chi gathering stage. Otherwise, your body won't be able to bear it and will hurt your foundation. Start practicing after you reach the chi gathering stage. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask Old Man Qian. This secret manual was given to me by him." Chu Qianyue continued. Chu Qianyue gave it directly, but Li Daochong felt it was heavy in his hand. Heaven-class manuals were rare even in the whole Federation, let alone in Blue Bay Star. The value of a heaven-class manual was immeasurable. Federation coins could no longer be used to buy it. It would cost at least millions of spirit stones. "Teacher Chu, do you have to go?" Li Daochong didn't know why he was reluctant to leave. "Yes," Chu Qianyue responded and looked outside the door. After a moment of silence, she said, "It's getting late. I have to go. Why don't you leave after dinner? We, master and disciple, have not had a proper meal together yet." Li Daochong urged him to stay. "No." "Oh, that's right. I heard from old Qian that Blue Bay Star's talent has withered in recent years, so the Federation has greatly reduced the number of Blue Bay Star students who can participate in the joint entrance examination of 100 schools. Originally, the top 30 students in the grand test would automatically qualify for the joint entrance examination of 100 schools, but this time, there are only 15 spots. Your end-of-term grand test ranking won't be the final result. Old Qian said that Blue Bay Star's Department of Education has decided to hold the first Blue Bay Star New Star competition, and the top 15 students will qualify for the joint entrance examination of 100 schools. After refusing, Chu Qianyue told Li Daochong this news, which hadn't been made public yet. Rising Star competition? Li Daochong's eyebrows revealed a hint of surprise, but in his heart, he scoffed at the sudden reform. He always felt that there were other reasons behind the reform. He could smell a hint of disbelief in his counterattack to win first place in the grand test this time. He was afraid that many people still didn't believe that he had won first place in the grand test this time. On the ghost hunting star, Li Daochong hadn't encountered any real strong opponents other than Orson. Although Zhan Honglai was strong, he was only around the top 20 on the Blue Bay Star. Anyone ranked above him could almost beat him to a pulp in one move. His fight with Orson had started without an end. So many people probably thought that he had retreated without a fight because he was afraid. In short, most people thought that he had won first place by luck. Li Daochong thought it was funny. This bunch of snobs really knew how to have fun. They actually held a new star competition. Are there any requirements for participating in a new star competition? Li Daochong asked seriously. Yes, 8th level of Qi refining, above 16 years old and below 20 years old. Chu Qianyue replied indifferently. Li Daochong was stunned for a moment. 8th level of Qi refining, below 20 years old? Didn't that mean that many sophomores could participate as well? Well, that's it. Before Li Daochong could react, Chu Qianyue's beautiful figure had already disappeared. The speed of a foundation establishment cultivator was not something that Li Daochong could catch. Chu Qianyue's departure made Li Daochong feel empty in his heart. He even felt a little insecure. Not long after Chu Qianyue left, Li Tianyang and Li Qingyao came back from the Li family with Xia Yun's memorial tablet. Li Daochong told them what happened in the afternoon. Li Tianyang went berserk on the spot. If not for Li Daochong and Li Qingyao desperately holding him back, Li Tianyang would have definitely exterminated the Zhan family. After more than a month of recuperation, and with the support of Li Daochong's powerful recovery liquid, Li Tianyang's cultivation had already recovered to the late stage of Qi gathering. Li Tianyang's late stage of Qi gathering was different from ordinary cultivators. After all, he used to be a cultivator of Jindan. With his magical power and foundation, the late stage of Qi gathering was equivalent to an early stage foundation establishment cultivator. Coupled with his trump card, even a middle stage foundation establishment cultivator may not be able to defeat Li Tianyang. Now that Li Tianyang really killed the Jin family, he could really exterminate the Zhan family. However, the outside world did not know that Li Tianyang's cultivation had recovered. They all thought that he would not live for long, and that his cultivation would drop a little every day and would definitely not exceed the 7th stage of Qi refining. This time, Li Tianyang and Li Qingyao went to the Li family to get Xia Yun's memorial tablet. It could be said that they were met with cold eyes. Not a single high-level member of the Li family appeared. Only a few family guards received them, and their attitude was very bad. Dad, the assassin should have known that you were not here. The Li family may have leaked the news that you went back to get the memorial tablet to the family that wants to deal with me. Li Daochong saw that Li Tianyang's anger had somewhat calmed down and said. Li Tianyang did not speak, but his face was ashen. He did not want to believe that the Li family would really play tricks behind his back, but now he had to accept the reality. Li Tianyang was silent for a while, then said, Son, I will be in seclusion for a period of time, no more than 2 months. During this time, you and Qingyao should be more careful. Li Daochong nodded. Dad, don't worry about your seclusion. I will set up a spirit array near the old mansion. Li Tianyang's eyes shone. Son, you must be very careful while I am in seclusion. After saying that, Li Tianyang entered the basement of the old mansion. During this time, Yinping had been busy renovating the old mansion and opening up all the places that could be used. The basement of the old mansion was originally used to store items, but Yinping had transformed it into a lounge. Yinping used the money that Li Daochong had given her to invite the neighbors of the slums to work together to strengthen and renovate the old mansion. The old mansion now was completely different from when they had just moved in. Over the next few days, Li Daochong spent all his time making spirit talismans and spirit arrays, and 3 of his spiritual brains were broken. For the past 5 days, he hadn't slept a wink. Together with Li Qingyao and Yinping, he had set up 3 spiritual arrays, 2 defensive and 1 offensive. Li Daochong did not have a deep understanding of spirit arrays. He relied on reading books and spiritual brains to set up 3-level, 2 spirit arrays. The level of the spirit arrays was not high, and their power was not great, but the sensitivity of the defensive spirit arrays was very high. As long as it was not a foundation establishment cultivator, it was almost impossible for anyone below the foundation establishment stage to quietly approach the old mansion. Li Daocheng was not good at setting up spirit arrays, but making spirit talismans was his strength. In 5 days, he made 12 spirit talismans, 6 ice talismans, and 6 fire talismans, all of which were level 3 strengthened versions. Li Daocheng had already touched the threshold of making level 4 spirit talismans. If his cultivation could be further improved and the strength of his telekinesis increased, level 4 spirit talismans would be easy to make. Of the 12 spirit talismans, Li Daocheng only kept 2 for himself. Li Qingyao and Yin Ping each took 5 of the remaining 10 for self-defense. The appearance of the assassin made Li Daocheng raise his guard 120%. After doing all this, Li Daocheng slept for a whole day and made up for it. After waking up, he ate a full meal and immediately went to his cultivation room to study the 9-split saber technique. Li Daocheng flipped open the 9-split saber technique and was about to start cultivating from the first level when suddenly a sound rang in his mind. Picked up a cultivation technique, 9-split saber technique. Do you want to learn 9-split saber technique? Hearing the prompt, Li Daocheng almost jumped onto the roof. The hot-blooded level-up device had such a function. Li Daocheng had only picked up 1 page of the 9-split saber technique. It was very similar to the situation in the game. He could pick up a cultivation technique and cultivate it. Li Daocheng was stunned for a moment, and then chose yes. In an instant, the power in Li Daocheng's body was instantly sucked dry. His body softened and fell to the ground. All kinds of images kept appearing in his mind. Some kind of ideology was copied into Li Daocheng's memory. In just 1 or 2 seconds, Li Daocheng had a very deep understanding of the 9-split saber technique. It was as if he had gone through several years of cultivation, but all of this was condensed into an instant. The spirit energy in Li Daocheng's body also disappeared in an instant. Pooh! Li Daocheng spat out a mouthful of blood. His vision turned black and he lost consciousness. When Li Daocheng woke up, it was already nighttime. His whole body was sore and his head felt heavy as if it was filled with lead. His temples were throbbing and he felt extremely uncomfortable. Li Daocheng had a similar feeling before, which was produced when he was cultivating the basic cultivation method and the psychokinesis attack. Although those 2 times were uncomfortable, it was still within the range of tolerance. This time, Li Daocheng felt like he was going to die. The 9-split saber technique was obviously much more powerful than the 2 basic cultivation techniques. With the hot-blooded level-up device, the cultivation technique could be completed in an instant. However, the side effects would increase with the strength of the technique. Li Daocheng felt guilty. Fortunately, his psychokinesis was strong. Otherwise, he would have lost his life because of excessive exhaustion. It seemed that he had to be careful when cultivating techniques in the future. If he was not careful, he would dig a hole and bury himself. Li Daocheng was secretly glad that he did not read the Great Void Sword technique. If he did, his body would probably be cold by now. Li Daocheng raised his wristwatch with difficulty and sent a message to Silver Bottle. Soon, the door of the cultivation room was pushed open. Silver Bottle hurried in and saw Li Daocheng's pale face and mouth full of blood. She was so anxious that she was about to cry. After a while, Li Qingyao also ran in. The 2 women worked together to carry Li Daocheng into the bedroom. Li Qingyao hurriedly found a spiritual liquid vat and poured all the strong recovery spiritual liquid in the house into it. Li Daocheng lay in the strong recovery spiritual liquid. In just a few seconds, the spiritual liquid in the vat decreased at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chapter 96. Lying in the vat, Li Daocheng's body emitted white mist. He felt a little better after all the spirit liquid in the vat disappeared, but it still wasn't enough, so he took out some spirit recovery fluid and drank it. Black liquid flowed out of Li Daocheng's body, and soon the whole vat was turbid. The severe pain in his head subsided a little, and his body also regained some strength. Li Daocheng took a bath with difficulty and fell into a deep sleep on the bed. Half a month passed in this sleep. While Li Daochong was asleep, the Qiao sisters, Lu Ming and Yi Feiyue, came to visit him. The old residents became very lively, but Li Tianyang and Li Daochong, father and son, one was in seclusion and the other was in a deep sleep, so they couldn't receive visitors. Li Qingyao and Yinping were both badly battered. The two women said that Li Daochong was out traveling and would be back soon. Yinping and Qingyao didn't know how Li Daochong was injured, but they guessed that Li Daochong might have suffered from qi deviation during cultivation, resulting in serious internal injuries. The two women didn't know when Li Daochong would wake up. Apart from being in a deep sleep, Li Daochong's physical indicators were normal. His heartbeat was strong and vigorous, and the spiritual aura on his body was boundless and heavy. When Qingyao approached Li Daochong, who was in a deep sleep, she felt a very clear sense of oppression. It was the reverence that a low-level cultivator would naturally feel when facing a high-level cultivator. Qingyao didn't know what had happened to Li Daochong, but she had a faint feeling that he would be different when he woke up. Yinping had been worried while Li Daochong was in a deep sleep. The smile on her little face had disappeared, and she would massage Li Daochong's body every day to prevent stiffness. Yesterday, even Xiansong University's cultivation school's vice dean, Qian Changhai, had come to call Li Daochong back to the school to register. The schedule for the Rising Star competition had been set, and it would begin in 2 months. Although there was still some time before the official start, the registration had already reached the final stage. If one did not register, they would not be able to participate. Qian Changhai waited for a long time, but there was no sign of Li Daochong. At first, he didn't care, but when there were only 3 days left to the registration, the old man couldn't sit still anymore. Ever since Li Daochong returned to Blue Bay Star, there had been no news of him. Chu Qianyue had left without a word. Qian Changhai arrived at Li Daochong's residence. He didn't expect that the young master of the Li family would actually live in the slums. But when Qian Changhai came to the old house, he sighed. There was actually such a paradise in the slums. This kind of old-fashioned house-style residence was very much to Qian Changhai's liking. It was very suitable for retirement and seclusion. The old house wasn't small. There were more than a dozen rooms, 2 courtyards, birds chirping and flowers fragrant, rockery pavilions, small bridges, and flowing water. It had a unique flavor. The one who received Qian Changhai was Yinping. The old man's eyes lit up when he saw the little girl. After learning her age, he looked regretful. There was a girl next door who hadn't grown up yet. No matter how old Qian Changhai was, it was inconvenient for him to make a move. If Chu Qianyue knew about Qian Changhai's dirty thoughts, she would definitely go berserk on the spot. She would take out the best hammer in the world and smash the old man into the ground. Qian Changhai naturally didn't see Li Daochong, but at least he had news of this kid. He had actually gone on a trip. Qian Changhai thought that it made sense. In previous years, there would be a 2-month holiday after the end of the big test. Going on a trip would also be helpful for cultivation. Most students would choose to go on a trip during this period. After drinking a cup of tea, Qian Changhai said goodbye. But when he left, old man Qian's eyes swept across a room in the depths of the old house. He sensed a weak but unusually pure spiritual energy fluctuation there. Old man Qian's old face smiled slightly and turned to leave. No matter why Li Daochong had disappeared, Qian Changhai decided to use his position to help Li Daochong register first. A month later, in a courtyard of the Zhan family located at the other end of Blue Bay Star in Baisi City, Zhan Holia's whole body was wrapped in gauze and soaked in a huge jar filled with green liquid. His body emitted a faint red glow. His aura had already reached the 10th layer of qi refinement. Zhan Jintian stood in front of the jar with a rare trace of satisfaction in his dignified eyes. The competition would begin in a month and a half. At that time, his son's cultivation should be able to reach the 11th layer of qi refinement. His sea collapse technique would reach another level, and his chances of entering the top 15 would greatly increase. The Zhan family had been standing in Tianyuan City for hundreds of years. It was only in his generation that they started to improve a little. And Jean Honlia's talent was even above his father's. He was the hope of the Jean family becoming one of the great families in the future. Father, someone is coming. Aren't you going to go out and receive them? Jean Honglai stood in the jar and said with his eyes closed, Don't worry, there's no harm in letting them wait. Jean Gentien said in a deep voice, Those guys are hiding in the back and letting our Jean family rush to the front. The assassins left and didn't return. They didn't dare to show their faces for a month and a half. They only came to visit after confirming that Li Daochong might be dead. They are even more careful than street rats. Do they really think our Jean family is cannon fodder? Jean Honglai frowned. Wealth comes from danger. If they didn't give me so many benefits, why would I agree to come forward? Without their filial piety, how could I refine this jar of spirit-gathering liquid? Jean Gentien's face revealed a sinister smile. Father, aren't you afraid that the matter of the assassins will be exposed? Of course I am. But even if it's exposed, those old foxes won't be able to escape. From the moment of the conspiracy, everyone is on the same boat. No one can escape unscathed, including the Li family. Jean Gentien said fearlessly, Is Li Daochong really dead? After Jean Honglai came back from a big test, he was locked in the Jean family's secret cultivation room by his father to reflect on his mistakes. After a few days, he began to cultivate, so he wasn't clear about the whole incident. The Dark Knight Alliance will issue a warrant for arrest if they don't succeed. The White Dao Security Bureau, the Dark Knight Alliance, and the Assassin Circle have their own rules. Li Daochong should be dead. I have arranged an informant to keep a lookout in the West District. In the Li family's abandoned old house, except for Li Qingyao and the card slave, even Li Tianyang is quiet. I think his son is dead, and Li Tianyang is injured in a fit of anger. He won't live long. Jean Gentien sneered. Being able to remove the thorn in his heart, Jean Gentien would wake up laughing in his sleep these days. Jean Honlia's eyes were still closed, but the corner of his mouth moved slightly. The news of Li Daochong's death made him very happy, but he was a little regretful that he didn't kill Li Daochong with his own hands. Jean Gentien waited for a while before leaving the secret cultivation room and coming to the courtyard hall. Li Qianxing and the other elders of the family had been waiting in the hall for a long time. Manager Li, elders, sorry for the long wait. Honglai encountered some problems in his cultivation, so I was giving him some guidance. Please forgive me for not coming out to meet you. Jean Gentien immediately apologized with a smile as soon as he appeared. Brother Jean, is there any news recently? Li Tianxing asked cautiously. The other elders of the family looked at Jean Gentien. Don't worry, everyone. I always do things cleanly and won't leave any traces. The assassin has already left the Blue Bay Star. Li Daochong will definitely die this time. Even if we report it, there won't be any results. Jean Gentien smiled and replied confidently. We trust Brother Jean. Recently, many people have gone to visit Li Daochong, but they haven't seen him. Even Li Tianyang hasn't shown up. I think the father and son are most likely on the road to hell together. A family elder said with a smile. There were descendants of the family who knew Ouyang Qian and the other women, and they learned this news from chatting. Haha, congratulations to Manager Li for pulling out the thorn in your heart. From now on, the Li family can go on the right path. You don't have to worry about people being obstinate and opinionated anymore. Another family elder laughed. In the future, I still need your support to make the Li family's business bigger and stronger. Li Tianxing said politely, trying to hide his joy. Manager Li, can the mine in Rising Sun City be handed over to our family for mining? The family elder immediately tried to build a relationship. Since old Chun asked, we will naturally give it to you. How about a 20% discount? Li Tianxing was worried about not having enough money to spend. How about a 30% discount? My family will gift the property rights of Green Street in the Eastern District to Manager Li. Li Tianxing's eyes narrowed, and he was overjoyed. No matter how he looked at the elder, he found him pleasing to the eye. Doing business with smart people really saved time and effort. Green Street was a famous bar street in Tianyuan City, and it had always been the property of the Liang family. Compared to the mine, real estate wasn't as profitable as the mine, but it was expensive because there were many beautiful women. Who knew how many families were jealous of the Liang family for not spending a single cent? Li Qianxing and the Liang family elder took the lead, and the other family elders and Zhang Jintian also began to discuss cooperation. The Zhang family's courtyard became the scene of a trade fair. Nearly 10 families came and went, each taking what they needed. Of course, they were all using the name of their family to put money in their pockets. In the Li family's old residence, Li Daochong lay quietly on his bed in his bedroom. Except for the occasional slight frown, he didn't move at all. He had been like this for a month and a half. Yinping sat by the bed, sobbing softly. She whispered, "Young master, you can't die." Li Daochong had already regained consciousness, but the spirit qi in his body was in a very strange state. The 9 spirit veins were slowly fusing together. The spirit qi was getting purer and denser, and the spirit veins were starting to take shape. Li Daochong's consciousness was in a wandering state. He could sense everything outside, but he didn't wake up. Not only that, but the flow of time in Li Daochong's sea of consciousness was very slow. 1.5 months outside seemed to be several years inside. The 9-split saber art was practiced in his sea of consciousness over and over again. Li Daochong was already very familiar with the 3-level saber art. Every time he practiced, the spirit qi in Li Daochong's body would become purer. The spirit qi, transformed by the Nether Ghost power, was majestic and vigorous, but couldn't completely fuse with Li Daochong's spirit veins. Most of it was scattered in other parts of his body and couldn't be used. The process of practicing the cultivation technique allowed all the spirit qi to be used and converged into the spirit veins bit by bit. That night, Yinping lay beside Li Daochong and fell into a deep sleep. A halo gradually emerged from Li Daochong's body. Dozens of seconds later, it disappeared. Li Daochong's sea of consciousness made a sound, followed by a notification. Chapter 97. While sleeping, Li Daochong entered the 10th layer of the qi, refining realm, while cultivating in his sea of consciousness. The spiritual energy in his body was constantly purifying and gathering, causing the 9 meridians to slowly connect together. Unknowingly, the spirit root began to take shape. Starting from the 8th layer of the qi, refining realm, every layer of cultivation would be a qualitative leap. The 11th layer of the qi, refining realm, was the highest layer of the qi, refining realm. Once it was broken through, it would be the qi, gathering realm. But the most important thing was the 10th layer of the qi, refining realm, which was the first layer where the 9 meridians would merge. If he wanted to break through this level, he would not be able to complete the breakthrough simply by increasing his spirit energy. He would have to connect all 9 meridians together to form the embryonic form of the spirit root before he could enter the next level. Li Daochong, on the other hand, was building the spirit root while cultivating in his sea of consciousness. As long as there was enough spiritual energy, entering the 11th layer of the qi, refining realm, would be a piece of cake. When the last meridian was completely connected with the other 8 meridians, Li Daochong let out a long cry in his sea of consciousness. His telekinesis had reached a new level, and his sea of consciousness was clear. The 10th layer of the qi, refining realm, had been completely consolidated. At this moment, Li Daochong had finally completely recovered. His body was indescribably comfortable, and his spirit had also changed. Li Daochong slowly opened his eyes. The sky was already bright, and Yinping was not by his side. He stretched and jumped off the bed. Surprisingly, his body did not show any signs of numbness, and was even more flexible than before. The world in Li Daochong's eyes had slightly changed again. As for what exactly was different, he himself could not tell. In short, it was different. Buzz buzz. A blood mosquito flew by. Li Daochong looked in the direction of sound. The blood mosquito was less than half a centimeter long, and every movement was clearly seen by Li Daochong. Even its wings, flapping hundreds of times per second, were clearly seen by Li Daochong. Li Daochong stretched out his index finger and flicked it gently. The poor blood mosquito instantly turned into ashes and disappeared. Goo goo. A drum-like sound came from Li Daochong's stomach. Clang. Yinping pushed the door open and saw Li Daochong standing beside the bed. The basin in his hand had fallen to the ground, and hot water had soaked the floor. Yinping's legs were also covered in water. However, the girl didn't seem to notice anything. Her lips trembled as she stared at Li Daochong in a daze. After a few seconds of silence, Yinping burst into tears. She threw herself at Li Daochong and hugged him, not caring about the seniority between master and servant. Young master, you're awake. You're finally awake. I thought you would never wake up again. Li Daochong patted Yinping's little head and opened his arms to embrace the little girl. Her frail body could be hugged with one arm, and she was even thinner than before. Li Daochong's heart ached. He said gently, "All right, don't cry. How could young master not wake up? Even if the king of hell came to drag young master away, young master would never leave with him. Do you know why?" Yinping raised her head and looked at Li Daochong in a daze. She asked cooperatively why. Li Daochong couldn't help but scratch Yinping's nose. He said, because then young master wouldn't be able to eat Yinping's cooking. How could he stop if he didn't eat it for a few hundred years? Yinping's delicate little face immediately turned red. Her sparkling skin was about to drip water. She wiped her tears and said seriously, "As long as Yinping can still cook, young master can eat it for as many years as he wants." "Ha ha, that's even better." Li Daochong pinched Yinping's little face and laughed. "Young master, are you hungry?" Yinping asked softly as she buried her head in Li Daochong's chest. She was a little embarrassed. "Hungry, very hungry, very hungry. I'm about to starve to death," Li Daochong said, unable to hold back his thirst. "Ah, then I'll go cook for young master now." Yinping was shocked. She pushed Li Daochong away and ran out like a wisp of smoke. Not long after, the sound of cooking came from the kitchen. Li Daochong felt an indescribable warmth in his heart. He stood at the door and saw Yinping's busy figure across the courtyard. An incomparably blissful smile appeared on his face. "Girl, it's been hard on you. When the competition is over, young master will take you around the Blue Bay Star." Li Daochong murmured apologetically. What was the purpose of cultivation? At this moment, Li Daochong seemed to have a new understanding of it. In less than half an hour, Yinping had cooked a table full of dishes. The portions were naturally sufficient. Now that they had money, no matter how big the young master's appetite was, it would be enough. Of course, the taste was also excellent. No matter how good the restaurants outside were, in Li Daochong's eyes, the best food was still Yinping's cooking. Li Daochong was indeed starving. He swept up all the dishes on the table like a tornado. His mouth was full, and he kept praising Yinping. "Girl, you eat too." Li Daochong picked up some food and gave it to Yinping. "Young master, you eat." "I'm not hungry," Yinping replied with a smile. Seeing the young master eat happily, she was very satisfied. "How can that be? Let's eat together. Hurry up and be obedient. Otherwise, young master will be unhappy." Li Daochong pretended to be angry. As long as Li Daochong was unhappy, Yinping would immediately panic. She would immediately listen to him. Yinping immediately picked up the bowl and chopsticks and started eating in big mouthfuls. She did not care about her image. The way she ate was comparable to Li Daochong. "Girl, do you want to cultivate?" Li Daochong suddenly asked on a whim. "Cultivate?" Yinping was confused. She looked at Li Daochong. "Young master, how can a card slave cultivate?" "Why not?" Li Daochong asked. Kada Star people's physique is very weak among the human race. They are not suitable for cultivation. In addition, the master of the card slave does not want the card slave to be too powerful. This will threaten the master's position. Yinping explained. "Who said you were weak? That is just the slave master brainwashing you. Young master thinks you are suitable for cultivation." Li Daochong retorted. "Young master, you just need to cultivate." Yinping does not need to cultivate. Yinping's task is to take care of your daily life and let you live comfortably. Ping said earnestly, but she sighed in her heart. The young master's brain was really active. He came up with such a strange idea. How could a card slave cultivate? Ping saw Li Daocheng's eyes burning with passion. She suddenly felt tired. Last time, the master and servant discussed whether or not the card slave was a property problem. Did the young master's brain short-circuit again? Ping, think about it. If you don't cultivate, how long will your lifespan be? Li Daocheng put down his chopsticks and said seriously. In fact, Li Daocheng suddenly thought that letting Ping cultivate was to ensure her safety. He could not stay by her side all the time. Li Daocheng still had a lingering fear from the assassination. If the assassin did not only kill him, but also the people around him, Ping was obviously the easiest one. Last time, fortunately, Ping and Li Tianyang went to the Li family together. Otherwise, who knew what would have happened? Now that he thought about it, Li Daocheng felt a lingering fear. Li Daocheng knew that Ping had been instilled with the idea of slavery since birth. It was hard to reason with her, so he changed his perspective to guide her. Young master, the average lifespan of a card slave is around 60. Those with better health can live up to 80. That's the limit. Ping replied seriously. Then if I can become a Jindan cultivator like my dad, how long will my lifespan be? Li Daocheng continued to ask. Ping tilted her head and thought, Ping is not very sure, but I should have around 200 years of lifespan. Li Daocheng laughed. That's right. If you die before me, who will serve me for the rest of my life? Ping's little face suddenly became sad. That's right. Who will serve young master then? Li Daocheng continued to guide her. Girl, you see, if you cultivate, you can also enter the Jindan stage. Then you can also live up to 200 years old. Then you can continue to serve me. Ping clapped her hands. That's right. Young master, you're so smart. Li Daocheng chuckled. How can I be your young master if I'm not smart? From today onwards, you will cultivate. When the time comes, I will give you 2 good mental cultivation methods and cultivation methods. Ping nodded dumbly. Okay. Determined to cultivate to the Jindan stage and follow in young master's footsteps to live up to 200 years old, Ping was serious. The master and servant reached an agreement. Li Daocheng opened a bottle of wine and had a small drink with Ping. Just as they finished drinking, Li Qingyao came back from outside. Seeing Li Daocheng wake up, Li Qingyao cried tears of joy, but when she calmed down, Li Qingyao looked at Li Daocheng strangely. Silly girl, why are you looking at me like that? Is there something on my face? Li Daocheng touched his face. Brother, news of your death has spread like wildfire in the school. Li Qingyao said something shocking. News of my death? Li Daocheng was stunned. That's right. Who said that? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.